Hey, fine, I know what's on it. I have it on my phone.
We're gonna call this meeting to order. It's a board business meeting. Everybody can rise. We're gonna do the pledge of allegiance.
To the flag, the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next up, can we get a motion to approve the meeting agenda? Dr. Francis, is there a second? Are there any amendments to the meeting agenda? Going once, going twice. All right. All those in favor of accepting the meeting agenda? 8-0. The next item is the consent agenda. Before we vote on that, I want to note that there are meeting minutes in here from the school start time committee, which has since been disbanded as part of our committee structure for this year. When the board accepts the minutes, we are just accepting the minutes as a report out from the committee, so I think we can do that as part of the consent agenda unless somebody wants to take them as a separate item. With that, I'll take a motion for the consent agenda. Dr. Francis? Second, Staten. All those in favor? 8-0. Thank you. All right, Mr. Scher is abstaining. Thank you. So it's 7-0-1. The next order of business is the school welcome from Mr. Healy. Before he starts, as he's walking up here, I will say that the audience got better seats tonight than the board did. That's why I look like a little kid back here. So.
Oh, that's a dig at you there.
Good evening, Chairman Bernstein, members of the Board of Ed, Dr. Gilday, members of Cabinet, colleagues, parents, and students. I'm proud to have this opportunity to host this evening's Board of Education meeting and share with you all the progress Central is making relative to the district's strategic plan. Building on our progress from last year, Central staff has anchored our work in the vision of the graduate. Maintaining a laser focus on these learner capacities has improved our decision-making process and ensures that everything we do is in service to student growth. Members of the Central staff have taken part in learning experiences that have transformed instructional practice through the educational conditions we create. From problem-based learning frameworks to interdisciplinary projects to the addition of our innovation space thanks to a grant from the Greenwich Alliance, we are seeing increased opportunities for students to engage deeply with the curriculum. Through these units and lessons, students are exploring complex and authentic problems, posing meaningful questions, evaluating information, and generating creative ideas and products. In fact, next Thursday, we're going to host our first student exhibition night from 6:30 to 8:30 as a way to share our collective learning with the community and celebrate all the wonderful student work. You are all welcome to attend, and we hope to see some of you there. Beyond the academic areas outlined in the vision of the graduate, the Central Middle School experience is also focused on developing personal and interpersonal capacities in all children. Our framework of positive interventions works proactively to teach students how to be ethical and responsible members of our community. At least once per week, every grade level uses our advisor-based time to teach a lesson that emphasizes caring for self and others. Furthermore, we recognize that the importance of developing resilient and reflective learners, and we're starting to highlight how to accept mistakes as part of the learning process and what it takes to overcome obstacles that stand in the way of our achieving our goals. Instilling a growth mindset in all CMS students is integral to our mission to prepare every child for his or her respective future in our interdependent global community. Finally, we're extremely proud of our commitment to each other. The interpersonal skills that are taught in today's world are taught and practiced across all school settings. In class, students are instructed how to effectively communicate with each other and collaborate to enhance the learning experience. Beyond the classroom, Central continues to demonstrate a commitment to service through our annual Thanksgiving food drive, where this year we raised over 3,000 items for Neighbor to Neighbor, a holiday Toys for Tot drive, a fundraiser in support of the Maria Ferrari Children's Hospital, and numerous other calls to action through our many student-driven clubs and activities. Learning how to organize and mobilize others for a common cause is one way our students acquire critical leadership skills. However, it's in giving back to our community, especially to those in need, that is essential in the development of empathy, which creates strong and lasting bonds between individuals. As you can see, Central is a beehive of activity and making notable progress in our journey to bring the vision of the graduate to life for our students and provide an authentic and meaningful education for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. All right, next up is our public hearing. The first speakers are the GHS student government.
Chairman Bernstein, Dr. Gilday, members of the board, good evening. This week and next week symbolizes many of Grand High School students' not most favorable time, the fun of midterms. During our student government meeting last month, we noticed the atmosphere during the meeting consisted of students looking extremely stressed. After the meeting, we sat down with our executive committee and reflected. We all had a mutual agreement that students all around were looking extremely tired, stressed, and not as well as they should be looking. With that, our sophomore class president, Zane Cotter, took the initiative to send out a survey regarding student stress. This preliminary survey covered all topics, such as AP classes, homework, presentations, and midterms, and everything else you could list. There was an other category. Ideas came from everywhere. The results were eye-opening, with midterms being the #1 stress on student gov reps' minds. After these results came back, we thought it was appropriate, due to the time of year especially, to specifically survey the whole student body on stress specifically related to midterms. Yet again, the results were shocking. Out of the roughly 750 students surveyed, the majority indicated that they were stressed on a level of 4 on a scale of 1 through 5, 5 being extremely stressed. There will be a post-midterm survey which will be similar to the pre that will allow us to compare these student responses. Being careful not to overinterpret these results, we hope to share some insights with the GHS administration, Dr. Gilday, and possibly the board. While I got to oversee all this, I must give credit where credit is due. Zane Cotter, leading the charge with the junior and freshman class presidents, had taken an amazing initiative and are pursuing it to bring awareness to this incredibly important issue. What we have done in student government is highlight an already known fact that students are stressed. But what we did is put it under a magnifying glass in our own school. Students are in need of their administration and their Board of Ed to help relieve their stress. Our survey was just a small step in the right direction, but we hope to keep this momentum going in order to alleviate student stress to the greatest degree possible. Thank you.
Chairman Bernstein, Dr. Gilday, and members of the board. So on a more positive note, I would like to share some of the class-specific updates. The freshman class just recently had a fundraiser with CALVA. The sophomore class, like as Greg stated, started to combat the issue of stress. The junior class has started planning for their junior prom, and the senior class has jump-started their plans for SRO in March. So for some upcoming events that are on the way, there's a fundraiser for the sophomore class at the Riverside Chipotle from 5 to 9 next Tuesday, and there will also be a blood drive on February 23rd. We're continuing our plan of the food truck fair in May and have chosen to donate all of our proceeds to the Make-A-Wish Foundation. Although midterms are the only thing on everyone's mind right now, the start of the new semester will hopefully bring new student government plans. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Carol Sutton, GA.
Good evening, Mr. Healy, Chairman Bernstein, and board members, Dr. Gilday, and cabinet members, and members of the audience and community. My name is Carol Sutton, and I'm honored to represent more than 900 members of the Greenwich Education Association. And if you're keeping count, this is actually my 50th speech as president of GEA. I've been keeping count. I've taken a little bit less time each time to do it, but I hope you take my words to heart. So I'm sorry the last work session was canceled, but good call on the snow day, Dr. Gilday. And I'm sorry to hear that students are stressed about midterms and other matters, and as always, I think that's worthy of exploration for sure. So at your past business meeting, you reached a unanimous decision on the superintendent's budget for 2018-19. In itself, that was quite a feat. But GEA was disappointed that you chose to subtract certain items. For instance, a coordinator for health and wellness, assistant deans for the 5 houses at GHS, and a coordinator for ESL and wellness. Now, we understand how hard it is to pass a budget. I'm a civics teacher, a history teacher, so I get the reality of limited resources and unlimited needs. And I also understand the political imperative to control spending and not to add to that dastardly headcount. While we understand your reality, our reality is that we know we can and need to do better for our students. Take physical education and wellness. As I have said many times, one of the board's strategic goals is, quote, to ensure each student develops the capacity to be responsible for his or her own physical and mental health. To attain that goal requires specialized leadership and a deep understanding of the unique subject areas and needs. It cannot be achieved by adding one more bullet point to another administrator's job or giving a teacher release time and no authority. Physical education is changing fast, incorporating new knowledge of the human body and utilizing technology as never before. Our teachers need curriculum leadership, but most important, physical education is by its very nature dangerous. Our facilities and equipment need to be inspected, monitored, and maintained by an expert who knows what to look for. Okay, with respect to the facilities people, they don't know what to look for in a gym where kids are instructed. This is a bottom line safety imperative, and it is only one that a coordinator dedicated to that subject can accomplish. I honestly don't get it. As for wellness, the board led the charge on later start times for the health and wellness and well-being of our students. And yet, there's no money for assistant deans at GHS, who are also providing a significant aspect of the health and well-being of GHS students. I called them first responders. I thought that would be compelling. As for AVID and ESL, we have to think about the future. The demographics of Greenwich are changing rapidly. It's not staying the same. The district needs dedicated leadership in these areas. So our school are places that are ready for the future, where all students can flourish. Again, GEA understands that this budget has left the barn, so to speak. But we will not stop fighting and speaking publicly on these topics for leadership that will create the safest, most engaging, and most successful programs possible for Greenwich students. The only other topic I want to speak on tonight is the HR monitoring report. There are so many points of light in there for teachers. For instance, it highlights an administrator aspirant program. We need it. A district of this size needs a path to leadership. Why? Because Greenwich students become Greenwich teachers. And those who do, who want to, I don't know why they would, but when they move to administration, they stay here. Tom Healy, thanks for coming back. We need administrators who are committed to this district and who are going to stay. The realignment of the HR staff that's in the monitoring report. Now that there is more clear delineation of duties and responsibilities, teachers can get answers and support more quickly, and I include myself there. HR finally digitized and updated the teacher handbook and put it on Schoology so we can get those answers. HR has recognized and set up some staff recognition for teachers, from administrators to paras to everyone, to recognize people in a small way for the work we do. HR has helped us get through all of our ADP glitches and woes that happen. If anyone's an employee out there, you know things can happen. And collaborated successfully with the town on new investment options which will help our teachers prepare for their future. What is not in the report, and I wanted to tell you, is that as you probably can guess, some visits to HR are very stressful. People are facing or thinking about retirement. They may be coming with a serious illness or a serious illness in their family. It may be a disciplinary matter. There's a lot of reasons to be stressed when one goes to HR. What this report doesn't tell you is that the HR staff approaches these situations with the utmost care, sensitivity, and professionalism. And it is a place that, and I see this often, and I'm just quite amazed. So, if you ever hear talk of merging HR between Town Hall and Havemeyer, please, please, please say absolutely not. Okay, thank you for your attention and looking forward to a good meeting.
Next up is PTA Council.
Good evening, Dr. Gilday, Chairman Bernstein, Principal Healy, members of the board, and Greenwich community. I'm Karen Hirsch, President of the PTA Council of Greenwich. Happy New Year to one and all. While the calendar year is just starting, we are returning from break to find ourselves at the midpoint of the school year. Midterms are coming. And it's also provided us the perfect opportunity to reflect on where we've come from and where we would like to go. Council began the year asking for more consistency, communication, and collaboration, and a more focus on parent involvement. These themes are just as important and relevant now as they were at the start of the school year. Council would like to congratulate the board on passing the budget and would like to take this opportunity to reiterate how appreciative we are for the hard work that Dr. Gilday and Ms. O'Donnell put into the preparation of the budget to clearly define and prioritize the current and future needs of the district and to use the budget as an integrated tool to lay out support for programs and principals. Council supports the vision for excellence and will continue to support and advocate for the education budget as it stands. We hope that as the budget continues on its way through the town vetting process, that all interested parties can come together to support our schools. And while on the topic of budget, the financial and staffing report noted that an area of concern was the cost overrun of close to $1 million for special education. Prior to accepting the report as it stands, we would ask that further clarification be provided as to where and how those funds are being used. Are they being used due to increased enrollment, for appropriate services to students, or in some other way? Council always advocates for good policy design, which should always incorporate a periodic review for any new initiatives. And we thank the district for its effort to solicit feedback on new bell times from parents, staff, and students, and ask that it sincerely heed this feedback. Wherever individual families may fall in the range of opinions concerning school start and end times, we all agree that student wellness is paramount. Council therefore asks that you consider the bigger picture of both improving student wellness and reducing stress for all students, while also continuing to push for increased educational opportunities and academic excellence. Council recognizes the scope of the nationwide opioid problem and really thanks the leaders of the town of Greenwich and the Greenwich Prevention Council for their efforts to combat this issue. Council supports the efforts, including the administration of a survey as required, so that the town is eligible for a federal grant to fund addiction prevention, education, awareness, and activities. What we ask, however, as always, is when engaging families to help by completing any survey, that parents be informed in advance about both the purpose of the survey and what the collected data will be used for, and that any information collected remain both confidential and anonymous. On the master facility plan, Council greatly appreciates the district's effort to both maintain and update our aging buildings and fields. However, Council continues to advocate that you work to engage the public in this process in a constructive way. We expect that the next update include a more detailed discussion as to the needs of each facility in town, as well as a timeline of priorities and suggested costs. We would like to better understand the parameters that were given to KG&D in regards to both classroom design and facility maintenance. We also note the importance of reminding the public that while it's called a 15-year plan, it is one that will be revisited and may be revised every 5 years. While the turnout at the initial public information sessions may have been low, please note that it does not mean that the public doesn't care or understand what's being discussed. Council asks that as a district organizes opportunities for the public to provide feedback on the plan, that it do so in a timely and informative manner. A better understanding of the focus of the public meetings, issues being discussed, and the questions the public will be asked to provide feedback on ahead of time will always draw more people to these sessions and make the time spent on this more productive for everyone. To continue our theme of finding ourselves at a midpoint, We're halfway through our 5-year strategic plan, and I'm more than halfway through my speech. We ask that the district continue to engage parents in this process. There's much interest in the math pilot, and while we may be charting new territory, there's already a wealth of experience in the district from which we can inform this initiative. Anecdotally, Council is hearing a wide variety of opinions about programs and applications already in use by the district, as well as those using the pilot. And it is really important to gather feedback from parents and students along with any other data points that you are using to evaluate what direction the district plans to take going forward, both with the math pilot as well as personalized learning. Again, we really ask that the district incorporate a periodic data-driven review. As personalized learning is a key of the strategic plan and math pilot, we ask that the district better define for parents what personalized learning means. Is it self-driven learning? Is it lessons that are customized to the needs and interests of each child? A combination of the two, or something else entirely? As the days are lengthening, we're happy for the growing light as we transition from winter to spring. And with those words, we also know that Dr. Gilday has been hard at work on a transition plan. Dr. Gilday, we truly thank you for all that you are doing for our schools, our students, teachers, and the community. And we hope that your transition thus far has been an easy one. Also, in honor of this week's celebration of Martin Luther King Day, we'd like to end with this quote. The function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. Intelligence plus character. That is the goal of true education. Thank you all for all that you do to make this goal come to fruition.
Thank you. Next up, we have community comments. We've got 9 speakers signed up so far. You're limited to 3 minutes. I know we've seen some of you previously here and at a CIP meeting. So to the extent that you can keep your comments concise and under 3 minutes, that would be much appreciated because we do have a full agenda this evening. And with that, the first speaker is Catherine LaBalbo.
Good evening. My name is Catherine LaBalbo. I am a representative from District 2, that's Coscob, the Harbor District. I don't find myself here often, but with the CIP review, I saw $5 million scheduled for turf fields in the budget. I myself was a student athlete. I feel that it is a valuable thing in a well-rounded education. I played lacrosse, soccer, basketball, and travel softball in the summer. Quite enthusiastic. So I'm quickly here to tell you about what turf fields mean, synthetic turf fields, and in terms of Greenwich, Connecticut. And I'm taking this and I'd like to submit it to the board as evidence of it. This is the synthetic turf specification. So for Greenwich High School. I use that to frame the synthetic field I'm talking about. So I'm not talking about Nebraska, Wisconsin, South Carolina. I'm talking about Greenwich High School field. The Greenwich High School field has a 10-year warranty. In line with that, it was replaced last year. It was bid out and replaced. It was installed 10 years before that. It will need to be replaced in 10 years. The bid data on your website has it as $880,000 total for the items that you selected to do Greenwich High School field. It means in 10 years you will rebid the project, not including soft costs, and the town of Greenwich will again, for one field, pay $750,000. That every field right now that's synthetic is on this 10-year cycle. Every 10 years it needs to be replaced. And then during the time that it's in use, it needs to be refilled. The filling selection, and in this case, what was chosen was EnviroFill. EnviroFill, which material data has items on it. Its product data says things like cancer, contains cancer-causing agent, could be routes of entry, eyes, inhalation, ingestion, and so on and so forth. Suspected cancer agent, and then is on a federal OSHA list as well as a bunch of other lists. This is pretty typical stuff when we look at synthetic materials. Like they have VOCs because they're inherently synthetic, they're chemical. And we typically go outside to avoid those things. So I will try and wrap quickly with saying that in the current POCD, we recognized 10 years ago in 1998 that there was an additional 5,000 hours of field time needed. They've been reduced by, the fields have been reduced by 8 because of school and municipal expansion, and an update to field inventory and development and a plan needs to address this for our new fields. The town of Greenwich is one of the largest property owners in the state, rivaled by the state of Connecticut, Yale University, and city of Stamford. With the committee that reviewed the properties,
Thank you.
I'll submit it for you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Patty Roberts, followed by Peter Urey.
Good evening. I'm Patty Roberts. I live at 9 Bramble Lane in Riverside. As a longtime resident of Riverside and a member of the RTM, I stand before you tonight to urge you to eliminate the $300,000 feasibility study for artificial turf from the 2018 to 2019 budget. Sorry. That doesn't take 3 seconds from my time. I have had 3 children go through Greenwich Public School, with my daughter playing on soccer at the rec level, travel, premier, and varsity level. Quality fields are important to me, and I just don't think the answer is more artificial turf. I object to the installation of expanding the use of artificial turf at all 3 middle schools, but specifically at Eastern for a number of reasons. First, Eastern Middle School is Riverside's de facto park. This is where my kids learn how to ride their bikes, shoot off their first rockets, fly their kites. The turf study project described in the Town of Greenwich Capital Improvement 2016 to 2031 said that the middle school fields were in poor quality. However, Eastern Middle School, as the school's master policy indicated, is in good condition. I don't see the idea of tearing up natural grass that is a good quality, which is sort of the gold standard that kids like to play on, to put in artificial turf. I will distribute at the end a booklet that was written by Turf Grass Resource Center that provided research on the risks and costs of the artificial turf. The first thing, the booklet is written by a number of universities in the Midwest. Research provides detailed information as to why it costs more. Sand-based natural fields cost $250,000 to $350,000 versus synthetic fields $850,000 to $1 million. Cost over 8 years for natural grass is $78,000 versus synthetic of $105,000. When you think about what's going on in our state, the idea of trying to increase our overall run rate does not make sense to me. The research further highlights it's not the right decision from the environmental standpoint. Moving from grass to artificial turfs will reduce our ability to generate oxygen and trap rainwater, reduce greenhouse gases. 1 acre of grass is equivalent to 1 acre of the Amazon rainforest. So I don't see why we would want to do that. Then you add the impact to the landfill when you have to replace it. That further makes me shake my head. Finally, the incident of turf burns, heat exhaustion, ACL injuries, and concussions are much higher. I'm out of time? Or 30 seconds, okay, thank you. Current artificial turf is not regulated. There's no good housekeeping seal of approval for what's safe for our children. One study that I found, Columbia University did a study, found that on the turf field in the Bronx, in the shade it was 86 degrees. At the center of the turf, it was 166 degrees. So both the CDC and the EPA has said that you need to be putting warnings on when you do, and Montgomery County in Virginia indicated they gave guidelines to the coaches and the athletic teachers of when the kids should play. So at least...
Thank you. And just so you know, if you give us materials, what we do is we give them to the administration who keeps them.
Thank you.
So we don't throw them away. All right, next up, Peter Urey, followed by Mike Simcoe.
Peter Urey is sick. So I have his talk, which is clearly going to be more than 3 minutes.
All right, our normal practice is if you want to submit that in writing, that's fine, or by email.
Okay.
Thank you. Next up is Urig. I'm going to mispronounce your last name, so I'm going to let you come to
Mike Simcoe next.
I'm sorry, Mike Simcoe next, and then George. Sorry.
Hi there. In November 21st of 2016, I wrote a letter to Joe Siciliano. It says, "Dear Mr. Siciliano, I live behind Eastern Middle School. My home office window overlooks the playing fields. As I write this, a crew of workmen is replacing the sod. This is the third time that sod's been replaced since I've lived here, which was 10 years at the time. The past summer, I went to a lacrosse tournament in Germantown, Maryland, and the fields there were amazing. The grass was just absolutely gorgeous. What I noticed was that all of the fields were crested and built beautifully. So the water irrigated the ground perfectly and ran off beautifully. And I said, I'm no agronomist, but I think the reason that the grass at Eastern Middle School has been dying is that it's very, very wet. If you want to solve the problem, I believe an extra amount of soil going onto it, blah, 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 and prevent it from having wet feet. So I sent the letter off to Mrs. Siciliano. A couple weeks later, I got a call back from a person by the name of Tim Coughlin. I don't know what department he's in, but he's at the town of Greenwich. And he said, oh, well, thanks very much for the letter. We appreciate it. Do you have any more? And I said, listen, I can send you some more information. And I have some more information on synthetic versus grass and how to maintain turf and stuff like that. But he said, Mr. Simcoe, the reason that we can't, and we don't want to do anything there with the grass is because we're afraid to disturb the land in the fear of pollutants. Okay. So I said, you mean you're going to put turf on because you're afraid of digging up the ground? And you don't want to build the proper turf fields, like the best turf fields that are available, because you're afraid of what's in that ground? All right, so if I hung up the phone and that was that. So this year I got a call from one of my neighbors that they're talking about putting turf in, and $5 million, which subsequently has been scaled back to a $300,000 budget item for approval. So I started doing a little bit more research. And I had spoken to that gentleman at Town Hall in December of 16. In February of 2017, in the BET minutes, it says that the then director of the Board of Ed, Director of
30 seconds.
Operations, okay, I'm going to try to make it really quick. He said that this is the director of the Board of Ed. He said that the reason that we're installing this is because the soil, we won't have to penetrate the ground. So, the Board of Ed is saying that something's wrong with the ground. This guy at Town Hall said something's wrong with the ground. I think that's the real issue here. I want to know, where is the demand coming from? Is it the principals?
Thank you, Mr. Simcoe.
Real quickly, is it the principals that are asking for this?
If we give you extra time, we've got to give it to everybody.
Okay.
You can certainly submit to us in writing if you'd like.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. All right. George is next, followed by, I think it's Sasha Tell, and I'm apologizing for poor reading skills.
My name is Dr. Nowitzki. I'm a medical doctor, and I'm president of a large hospital medical staff in the state of New York, the largest psychiatric hospital in the state of New York. I'm actually a war refugee, believe it or not. I'm lucky to be in America, and I try to give back in gratitude for the country's done for me. I wound up going to Ivy League medical school on a scholarship, so I try to give back, and that's why I'm here. Never done this before, so pardon me. Pardon the stumbling around. Went to Cornell. I was also lucky that our teacher, head of our chemistry department, biochemistry, had just won the Nobel Prize a few years earlier, and so we talked a lot about molecules, and so that's why I'm here. The turf field is a lot of molecules. It turns out that just to pave 1 acre of a field, you have to grind up 26,000 tires. That's one of the basic ingredients of this crumb rubber material. And there's not much disagreement that that's fundamentally carcinogenic. The question is, well, to what degree? Now, when I was a kid growing up here, there was a similar discussion about cigarettes, I remember, and they actually had doctors saying that Lucky Strike was the favorite cigarette for doctors, and so forth. So my point is that the various studies that minimize the carcinogenic quality of the field really are measuring things like athletes, 2 or 3 hours, their urine and all this business. But what they forget is, another American word I've learned, that abutters, that is people who live on the periphery of the field, are exposed to this crumb rubber and pulverized tiny particles 24 hours a day, particularly in the summer months when our favorite southwesterly wind blows in, so that the kids, the adults, are actually inhaling these materials. Even the benign papers written about it say, wash your hands, do your laundry, don't use the same clothes, and so forth. So we're talking about active carcinogens, which are very expensive, versus, as a prior speaker mentioned, an acre of grass which will do what the Amazon rainforest does for us for nothing, and also take up our carbon dioxide in the process, besides giving us the oxygen. So my point to say, thank you. My point to say is that let's not fall into the trap of Love Canal, the cigarettes, the multi-billion-dollar settlements, class action suits that come 1 or 2 generations later, and have many of you, perhaps, named as defendants in class action lawsuits for allowing known poisonous materials to be installed. So I recommend no turf fields, just grass.
Thank you, sir. The next speaker, I think, is Sasha Tell.
Hi.
Come on up. And then after that is Jude Bronstein.
Okay, so hi, I'm Sabine Tell. I'm a 6th grader at Central Middle School, and I'm also a member of the field hockey team. And I'm going to tell you about the fields and the situation and all that stuff. So, first let me explain to you the situation of practices at middle school. So the soccer team, whether it be the boys A team, boys B team, actually boys B team isn't on the main part. Whether it be the boys A team or girls team, is in this big part, the big actual field, I guess loosely speaking. Then in the corner, right by there, is where the other soccer team is practicing, the boys B team. And then this little part of goose poop land is where the field hockey team ends up. And it's crammed. We are going into each other's practices. It's chaotic. So then you're asking, let's put these high schoolers into the middle school field. We don't have any room with just the middle schoolers. How are we going to fit these high schoolers in too? It's going to be really chaotic. Besides the fact that Central Middle School fields are, if you have looked outside, really bad, really bad. I'm not suggesting we do turf or anything, because based on what the previous speakers tell us, it's really bad, all these cancer-causing chemicals in it and stuff. But the fields are bad, and they're crowded, they're small, and you don't want to put high schoolers in there too, because there's no room. Thank you.
Next up, Jude Bronstein, followed by Rosemarie.
Rock on, Sabine. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Jude Bronstein. I live at 300 Orchard Street in Greenwich. I am a neighbor to Central Middle School. I am also obviously a resident of Greenwich, a taxpayer, and a voter. The thing that I ask myself time and time again as we have this discussion about artificial turf and this stadiumization, which is a new word I learned, you learned about it, I learned stadiumization, of Central Middle School, is why and how. So my first question is, why are we still having this conversation? Everything I've heard, everything I've read, points to this being a really, really bad idea. When I look at the 4 main objectives to artificial turf and the stadiumization, they are financial, public safety, public health, and the environment. Now, that's not necessarily in that order, nor is that exhaustive. There are lots of other things that go with that. You'll hear people talk about the loss of amenity, the devaluation of our property, the mix of high school students and 10-year-olds, and the list goes on and on. But I want to just take a moment to look at the four main ones and talk a little bit about those. So let's start with financially, and this I think is a pretty easy decision. As we've heard a couple of times here today, and I've heard at other meetings, this is expensive. The turf, the maintenance of it, it's all very expensive, much more expensive than when you compare it to natural turf and natural grass. Now, you also have the financial information available to you, which I'm sure you've read, and I won't bore you with the details, mostly because there are too many, and probably I don't even understand most of them. So my question to you is, why do you think this is a good investment when all the indicators demonstrate it to the contrary? The next area is public safety. Let's talk about traffic for a moment. If you've ever been at Central Middle School when they're dismissing the classes, you know that it's chaotic, and frankly, it's a bloody miracle no one's gotten seriously hurt. Sporting events and practices during all hours of the day and the night will extend the time that we expose our neighborhood to traffic and the accompanying traffic hazards of people rushing to get home. So my question to you is, why do you think this is a good idea for our neighborhoods and for the safety of our children?
30 seconds.
Public health. In the last few months, I've had a crash course in the dangers of artificial turf, both to families, to players, to neighbors, and the airborne particles, the carcinogens, skin irritations, the higher risk of injury, and a whole suite of other things. My question is, why are we willing to set aside all of this information and continue to give this serious consideration? The environment, runoff, soil souring, loss of green spaces. Another question, why are we so determined to undertake a project that will contribute to the degradation of our environment? Thank you.
Thank you. Followed by Arthur. One more before you. You're on deck.
Good evening, everyone. I am Rosemarie Lane. I am a neighbor of Central Middle School. I have spoken before many of you. I just want to give you a little perspective. Jack and I have lived here 50 years, 38 on Coach Lamp Lane. I served on the boards of the PTA at Parkway, at Central, and the high school, sometimes simultaneously on 2 school boards. My husband was president of the PTA at Parkway School. He served in the RTM for 20 years. He was on the finance committee as chairman for 10 years. We raised 5 children here. All 5 graduated from Greenwich High School. 3 of our children were tagged, gifted and talented. 2 were superb athletes. All 5 were high achievers, highly motivated by superb teachers and coaches. Okay, that's some little background. We have worked very hard during our 5 decades here with hundreds of other devoted volunteers to keep Greenwich a very desirable, affordable community in which to live and raise a family. That is why we can attract superintendents to come here and work and live. So I come to the request regarding the field at Central. You have heard a very, very good presentation by a very young neighbor of ours and by Jude, who's just recently preceded me. This request goes against all that my husband and I have worked so hard to make Greenwich the town it is today. Yes, the fields need remediation. Grass, not turf. High schoolers have a stadium and other fields to use right on their own campus. In October, we were first made aware that the Central Fields were on the BOE's agenda for much more than remediation. First, we went from diesel, then we went to turf, we went to underground cables, we went to lights. We didn't know how many teams were playing, how many players were involved. We were told rugby, 150 players. Then we read in the newspapers what other teams were coming. At each meeting that subsequently followed,
30 seconds.
Oh, okay, which is a shame. There must be alternatives which you have considered, but which you have not shared with us.
We would love to know of them so that perhaps we can help you make decisions for our community. In the interim, I implore the BOE to please abandon this very unpopular course for the remediation of the central fields.
Time.
Now and for the future. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
The next speaker is Arthur Yee.
Good evening. For people who don't know me, I know I've spoken before this board in many meetings before, but I've been a Greenwich resident for 50 years. I graduated from Central Middle School here in 1971, and I graduated from Greenwich High School in 1974. As a physician, concerned parent, community member, and also former Greenwich High School varsity athlete, I am concerned about these plans that have been put forth by the Board of Education concerning plans in using potential carcinogens. As I presented at an earlier Board of Education meeting, I presented very compelling evidence of how diesel fuel exhaust has been classified as a carcinogen by many international agencies. And as a result, I applaud the Board of Education withdrawing that plan to use diesel generators. However, now I'm hearing about many people talk about the potential carcinogenic effect of artificial turf, which makes me also more concerned. I think we need to step back and look at the whole big picture in life. As a physician, I'm very concerned about wellness, as many speakers before me have talked about. As you've heard the saying, if you don't have the health, you don't have anything. And I think that's so true. So before we move ahead and do feasibility studies and using potential carcinogen, we should step back and think about what's most important for our students, which I think is their health. I think that case of that 10-year-old New Canaan boy recent this week really brings that point to the forefront, and not sports. I believe that health comes first and wellness, then academics, and then sports. I know we live in a very sports enthusiastic society. As a former Greenwich High School athlete, I'm all for sports. But I think we need to step back and prioritize what's most important. And if we're going to deal with potential carcinogens, we have to step back and look at that first. We shouldn't push ahead and either do feasibility studies or turf the fields just because we're either lacking facilities compared to other towns for that reason. I'll tell you a story that after the January vacation, one of my twin daughters woke up on January 2nd and felt tired and didn't want to go to school. And I said, so-and-so, you don't have a fever, you don't look sick, you're going to school. She said, well, I don't feel well, but I want to go to gymnastics practice. And my daughter's a very good gymnast. She was a state champion for her level in Canada for OBrien for the past 2 years. As a responsible parent, what would the answer be? My answer was that if you don't go to school, you don't gymnastics practice. Sports does not come before academics.
30 seconds.
Academics does not come before health. So I request the Board of Education, please consider priorities and step back and look at the whole big picture, which I think that case of the 10-year-old boy who really made me think about and make sure all of us should think about what is most important in life. And that's health first, academics, and sports in that order for our students. Thank you.
Thank you. That's the last speaker that signed up. Is there anybody else that would like to address the board? Mr. Paulding. Same 3 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Brian Peldunas. I'm representing the Riverside Association. You're probably wondering why I'm here and not somebody else. I'm lucky enough to be married to Liz Peldunas, who's one of the co-presidents of the Riverside Association, who's at a POCD meeting tonight, so you get me. Sorry. The Riverside Association conducted a brief survey of neighbors regarding the proposal for synthetic turf and lighting at Greenwich Middle Schools. Notification of the survey was sent to neighbors on our email list, and data was collected electronically via SurveyMonkey between January 10th and 15th, 2018. Riverside residents and property owners were asked to respond to the following statement. I support installing synthetic turf and performance lighting on the playing fields at Greenwich Public Middle Schools, particularly Eastern Middle School, for $5 million per location to improve field utilization throughout the school district. 90 people responded. We got no answers from 72 72 of the 90, which is 80%, yes from 15, which is 17%, and not sure from 3, which is approximately 3%. 60 people supplied comments regarding the proposal. You'll be happy to know that I won't be reading all 7 pages of that. The comments will be emailed to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wishes to address the board? Step forward and introduce yourself. Thank you.
I don't have anything planned. I'm Ashley Cole. I live at 11 Hillside Road, across from Greenwich High School. And obviously we have a lot of problems as neighbors with what's going on at the high school. We love living in such a wonderful, active area. However, it has become clear to us as neighbors that we're trying to cram too much into this space. Our fields are toxic. We've got problems with turf, different opinions on that. We don't meet even the simplest parking codes and requirements at Greenwich High School. The traffic is a disaster every day. There are safety issues at hand everywhere. It seems to me that we should be talking about building a new high school in town. I don't know why we're not talking about it. We're a town with a grand list is $31 billion. Don't you think we can come up with a new high school for the kids of Greenwich, Connecticut? One where the fields are safe and that we can use them night and day, and one where the facilities are of the highest caliber. It seems to me that this is really the answer here. I just want to put that forward right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, with that, we're going to go ahead and close the community comments. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you addressing the board. That was easy. Next up are our monthly reports, starting with the superintendent's report.
All right. I'm going to keep the superintendent report brief because I have a transition plan update later this evening. I'd like to congratulate our teacher, Bethany Fiscaldo, GHS Orchestra Director, for being selected to present at a New Jersey Music Educators Conference on classroom approach to teaching cello. 13 students were recognized in the Scholastic Art Awards competition. Those were highlighted recently with very intriguing creative artwork. Our athletic teams continue their success this winter season in the conference, with many holding places in indoor track and girls and boys hockey wins. Our CIP process, CIP process in town has reviewed and rated 6 potential projects as part of the overall town capital budget, including furniture for GHS, as well as updates to the locker rooms. Ongoing, sorry, I have a squeaky voice anyway, now it's more squeaky. Ongoing information is being shared regarding both cleaning protocol as well as influenza prevention hints. We were just in another room that had a little drawing. I'm hoping that's not what's happening here. I did do my shot. Please do report symptoms if calling your students in so that we can accurately report to health department any trends. We do have a really solid protocol with some Virex that is also sprayed and has been used to try to keep those items down. And that would be it for right now, and I'll be back with my transition report.
Thank you. All right, we're up to reports of officers, committees, and liaisons. Let's start at that end today. Anybody? Takers? Looking down this way. Committee reports, liaisons. All right, hearing none. Wow. We'll move on then to our discussion items. So the first item is the Cardinal Field Feasibility Study Update. Ms. O'Donnell.
Good evening.
I have recently joined the Cardinal Field Feasibility Study team to provide support, direction, and help advance the project. I'd like to take a moment to recap our progress to date. The Cardinal Field Feasibility Study launched last year to develop conceptual designs for a refreshed or redesigned athletics facility that could serve all of our students' needs and one that meets today's standards. This early concept was to outline addressing necessary items like replacing existing bleachers that are in poor condition, installing ADA access and accessible bathrooms, and replacing our scoreboard to a fully functioning state. This is what I refer to as the conceptual design phase, as it is the common language in the construction field, where we are identifying what our needs are in a very high-level way. The slides are presentations of layouts that many have seen and that you'll see in tonight's presentation are conceptual designs of what the district is aiming for, and it should reflect the design that the district believes is feasible. So selecting a conceptual and feasible design was the task of this study team. I'd also like to briefly highlight the accomplishments of this phase to date. The district hired KG&D architects to perform the feasibility study. They were given a set of tasks and asked to develop a schedule of next steps. The feasibility phase process involved a rather lengthy process to allow stakeholder involvement via focus groups with town members, the high school staff, neighbors, interested athletic groups, and updates were provided at public board meetings like this one back on October 19th. In addition, our website included a link where the district was able to receive feedback through the process, and we've received approximately 35 comments. We thank you for your feedback. We've heard all your feedback, we've recorded it, and if applicable, we've incorporated it into the design. We have built into the FY19 capital plan $200,000, which was approved by the board on December 21st to continue on with this project. And that would allow us to move forward with the design development and a comprehensive site plan. This process allows us to continue collecting information required for this comprehensive site plan, which would then be the document that would be submitted for all regulatory approvals. The next phase, if approved, will continue to address the feedback we've heard from the stakeholders and involve more detailed design work. So tonight, KG&D will provide a progress update. We anticipate that the committee will make a recommendation of a single design option to the Board of Education at the February 22nd meeting. That's our next business meeting. While the feasibility study would come to a close on that date, this is only the first step in the process of redesigning the Greenwich High School Stadium for our students. The next phase of the project will continue on during the school year 18-19 and includes advancing the design as I just previously described. I'd like to welcome Russ Davidson of KG&D.
Thank you, Lori. So this is an update tonight for the board, and we have some slides over there that are a little bright, but hopefully you can see them. There are some new images, which I hope will be exciting. So again, just recapping, the main reason for the study is ADA access, bleachers, toilets, parking. The main bleachers have been shored up. They are safe, but they have exceeded their expected useful life and they need to be replaced. We also do not have toilet room facilities. There's very poor access for teams and spectators, and there's inadequate team storage and concession facilities. And not to be overlooked, it's a very important facility. For some, it's the only place where they come and see Greenwich, and it really presents very poorly. It is not something you can be proud of in its current condition. So we did, Lori covered a lot of this, but we've been to a lot of meetings. I think this is my 4th time this week on Cardinal Stadium alone. We looked at 3 design options as a way of exploring the range of possible approaches. 2 that were interesting to discuss are not favored by the committee. Option A, which is basically the minimum disruption to the site, but without relocating the tennis courts, you really do not improve access, and there's not enough room for a building to provide the full facilities needed by the field, and it's still pretty expensive at $11.1 million. Option C was sort of the ideal configuration, which would relocate the entire field and change its orientation to a preferred sort of north-south orientation versus an east-west orientation. But this was not preferred by the committee for two reasons. It's very expensive at $23.6 million, and also would require 2 years of construction, where you would be without a main contest field or without tennis courts. So the committee really didn't think that that was palatable, as the field is a contest field. It's for graduation. So the option that the committee is really leaning towards recommending is option B. And again, this does not alter the existing track or synthetic turf field. This is all about what happens outside the fence. It would have new 2,000-seat bleachers with a larger press box, and the I don't know if this is going to work at this distance. The big difference is this possibility of a road that connects Putnam Avenue to the high school parking lot. And everybody that's seen this believes this is worth exploring. And I want to say that again, it's worth exploring. You need to do a traffic study, obviously, to figure out how it works best. Is it right turn in and right turn out? Is it used only during games? Is it gated and an emergency access only? Or is it open all the time? And those are all possible options for this road. But we have heard from public safety professionals that the idea of another way in and out of a high school campus besides just Hillside Avenue is a valid concern, and it would really be a good idea if done properly. So as Lori would say, said earlier, if this goes forward, when the full site plan gets analyzed, civil engineering and a traffic consultant would come on. We have had preliminary discussions with Connecticut DOT and the town traffic engineer, and nobody has said absolutely no way, but there's more work to be done on it. But I do believe it provides a lot of advantages. Even if it remained gated at this area, it provides 75 additional parking spaces that could be used by the high school every day, which would really go a long way towards some of the shortage of parking spaces that are there today. The other thing that this does is it provides a nice pedestrian connection, a turnaround for teams to drop off. That circle is actually large enough for buses, and then a building which would be, your gatehouse for taking tickets. Also have men's and women's handicapped accessible toilet rooms. Would have team rooms for both home and visiting teams. It has locker rooms for referees so they have a place to change. A small concession facility, some storage, and above it, it would have the team training facility. This does require relocation of the tennis courts. But we believe that would be permissible. There are some issues with wetlands buffers, but right now the tennis courts are in a wetlands buffer. When we talked about soil conditions, it's expected that this is an area that is less likely to have fill than other areas, but obviously as part of developing the site plan, you do a lot of tests, and if something comes up, you modify it. So option B is really the sort of direction. We're talking about it is something that could be done in phases. Here are some of the new images that we put together. I should say a talented young person put together. Who's more computer savvy than me. But so this is that through road. This is the current field. This is where the new main bleachers would be. They would be replaced, and then we're going to move closer to the field. You'll have improved sight lines. You'll have complete handicapped access and a larger press box. And that would allow for parking, parking behind the stadium. This is from the other view. So you can see this is where you come from the high school parking lot to that entrance circle, and this is where the new building would be. That would contain all those facilities. And this is, as you walk down that road to the new stadium, that's what your view would look like. So we think it would be something that would really fit in well. It's very much in keeping with other facilities in Fairfield County, and it would be something that everybody could be proud of. So looking from the other way, this is a little hard to see in the light. This is a line drawing, but this is the edge of the field. This is where you would come through. You would go right to the visitors' bleachers and left to the home side bleachers. These are the doors to the toilet rooms and team rooms on the lower level. And this is the team training facility up above. Actually has little roof decks on either side that could be used to watch games or for training. And this is a sketch which is so washed out you can't see it at all. With the lights on, and this is the end. But we are at the end of this study. It has been extended so that we could do a second round of stakeholder meetings, which have now been completed. I guess what we've heard is that this is a very good aspirational plan, but everybody is concerned that the perfect does not become the enemy of the good as we move forward, that we continue to adjust as we learn through the approvals process what's realistic and what can be approved. And that, you know, what's really good about option B is once you're in the pursuit of a large plan, if there's aspects of it that can move forward, they could move forward independently. So we have enjoyed working with you on it and hope to continue. It is a conceptual design, so I would say, but we've gotten very granular about the needs for the building, the number of seats for the bleachers, and put together pretty detailed budgets for you. We want to take questions on this?
Yep. Are there questions? Ms. Tatum?
With the chair's permission, I'd like to ask our town attorneys to answer a question.
Sure. Wayne, I don't know if you want to come to the front or if there's a microphone over on the table. You have a microphone? No?
No.
No, so you have to come up front. Good evening.
And thank you. I'm looking at the plan for option B. I don't know if you have this material in front of you. Okay, so I'll read to you. Which of these aspects can move forward as almost independent entities in the redesign of Cardinal Stadium without any legal difficulties under the current stipulation that we have with Mr. Efros? We have new bleachers. Is that permitted?
I'd go back a bit if I could. The stipulation that relates to Mr. Efros and City of Greenwich, Town of Greenwich, relates primarily to lights.
Yes.
So with respect to things that are not related to lights, I think the town can move forward.
Okay, so I'm just going to make absolutely sure while you're with us, because you're rarely with us.
But let me be careful. The best thing lawyers like to do is to come up and ask questions which they're not aware of the questions before they got here and haven't had the opportunity to review them. This is a feasibility study. What specifically would be proposed, we don't know. So I don't want to speculate with respect to answers. I don't want to give answers that are looked upon as being locked in granite when we haven't studied or really even seen the concept before this evening.
I understand. There's no lighting mentioned here.
As I have seen it, it would not appear to be.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Sharp.
A question for Russ. Russ, in this plan, I don't see in any of the drawings lighting. I presume we're going to have lighting.
Lighting's in the budgets for every version is replacement of performance lighting with LED lighting.
So it means the lighting that's there, I presume, would be reconstructed and moved?
Yeah, our goal was to give you a comprehensive budget for everything it takes to modernize the stadium. So that's why the budgets for LED lighting, performance lighting was included in the budgets.
Other questions?
You said you did already seek wetlands approval,
No.
but that
Okay.
No, there's no approvals. This is about putting together a concept that's the goal, and then you would go through this process. But we did meet twice with town people, including yesterday, and the message we got was nothing here seems insurmountable. Obviously, there's a process, but nothing seemed insurmountable from their point of view.
Dr. Francis.
I hesitated to ask this because I'm not sure you're going to have an answer, but to me, that extra road is a huge benefit of Plan B, but not if we're not really going to be able to use it. So can you guess what the likelihood is that we'd be able to use it in some way for drop-off and pickup so we could alleviate some traffic issues around our high school?
I'm not a lawyer, so I can guess. I'm just an architect. I think it's a very attractive idea, and everybody who's seen it says that makes a great deal of sense. So I think there's a high possibility that it'll be used at a minimum as an emergency access point and at peak use.
Just to point out, it's Route 1, it's a state road, so even if everybody locally thinks it's a great idea, you have the state process, so it just...
Right. I mean, our civil engineer contacted Connecticut, and the first thing they said, what's the town think about it? So you'll see how that'll go. Thank you. A lot of back and forth.
Other questions? Mr. Sherman?
Russ, in this design, there's a whole bunch, I can't see this in the drawing. There's a whole bunch of, there's chillers and stuff for the high school building.
Yep. We don't have to move them.
This plan presumes all that stays where it is.
Yes, it does.
Okay. And the question I have, I guess, is for...
The new road would be just to the right of the chillers the next time you're out there.
Right.
Look at the 30 feet just to the right of the chillers, and it would be a straight avenue out. And that's a 12-foot wide sidewalk and a 25-foot two-way road. So it's very generous and would allow people to get there from the parking lot and not have to walk on the road.
When you go through the stakeholder, you're going to do round 2 of stakeholder.
We've done it. Finished today.
You already did it.
Yep.
Okay, so we're not going to have a chance to get any more feedback from people about this.
It's the discretion of the board, but the process that we designed with the committee initially has now been completed.
So let me just say, you went through the stakeholder. So we're seeing this after it's done, right?
Not fully baked, so the committee still has not met to vote on it and accept option B as the option to move forward to the board. They're going to do that sometime between now and our February 22nd meeting. The idea of having it come before us tonight is if we want to give feedback, if the public wants to give feedback, this is that opportunity. It will come up again at our... This will come up at our public meeting in February. So we will have the public hearing before that, as well as people can certainly go to the committee as well.
What's the expectation of what we'll be doing in February? Just hearing it, or?
If the committee moves it forward and they vote on it, it could come to us actually for a vote to move forward with option B once the money is appropriated, because we've requested additional funds in our budget for next year to move to the A&E phase where we can move this.
Okay, that sounds a little backwards. Here's the thing I think we have to know. If someone's going to ask us to take action on this, I think we have to know. I'll want to know from the public. I mean, the original remit was, we gave you a remit which was Cardinal Stadium. We did not give you a remit that said build a stadium somewhere. Here would be the question I would want to know from the public is, would this committee recommend that we do this, spend $15 million rebuilding a stadium, which this is a beautiful plan, I love it. I've seen the others, but if we couldn't ever light it, other than the restriction we currently have, is this what the committee would recommend, or would they have recommended go look for another location because lighting it so you can use it is critical? It seems to me the stakeholders were, all of the athletic parents, all of the Greenwich Athletic Foundation. There were all these stakeholders, and I'm presuming, Russ, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I should ask this first. Did you ask that question?
Well, before you get there, let me just point out, Mr. Chair, that the remit of the committee was Cardinal Stadium and limited to Cardinal Stadium. So I'm not sure it's exactly a fair question to ask the architect what the committee was thinking.
Well, here's what we heard. We heard from a small constituency that you shouldn't invest anything in the stadium unless you can turn the lights on more.
Okay.
We did hear that. We heard from the committee consensus. There's going to be a field there. Most of this needs to happen, even if you can't turn the lights on anymore. The place is an embarrassment.
So, yeah, I got that part, but is there recommendation?
Needs toilet rooms, needs bleachers, needs storage.
So you're saying, I just want to repeat that back. You're saying the committee discussed it, and the committee's recommendation is spend this $15 million regardless of whether we can light it or not.
Light it any more than you can currently light it, yes.
Okay.
That was an explicit discussion because it's a big issue.
Ms. Deb.
Hi, Russ. I don't think we've met. I'm Kathleen Stowe. This is great. It's beautiful. Can you just tell me how this compares? Did you guys do the Darien, Wilton, New Canaan? No. Okay, that these are sort of ones that we should be trying to compare ourselves to?
We were asked to pursue, to do some research on sort of benchmarking. We did White Plains High School some time ago, so it's a similar sized high school facility. They spent about $9 million at that point. They already had their building there, and they did a field and track as part of that. But it was a 2,500 seat bleachers. We've been involved in a lot of fields, and I've heard a lot about synthetic turf from lots of people. But I don't know what they spent at these other facilities. I would say that the things that are a little different here is that you're a bigger town than some of those other facilities. The toilet facilities that we're proposing are a little bit more robust than those, but most of those are much closer to their high school. So they don't, the main building serves as the team rooms and adjunct toilet facilities, where because of your distance, you're not able to do that. That's just not practical for your facility. So I do believe the building size is larger than your benchmark elsewhere, but that's because of the distance.
Ms. Daly.
Could or should this option B be constructed in phases, and if so, what are the costs and benefits of doing it in phases?
We do have a prospective phasing plan, but there's an itemized cost estimate.
In larger terms, not the actual dollar costs, but if we were to construct it in phases, what are positive elements of that and negative elements of that,
Okay.
and what would you recommend for option B?
The positive elements are there are some donations available for some portions of this plan that have been out there for a while, and it would be wonderful if those things could happen, because they've been waiting. So that's a positive. For the rest of it, I would say get all your approvals and disrupt the place once and do it right. And that's really what I would do. If you've got money in waiting and people frustrated that something hasn't happened, I would encourage the board to facilitate so that that can happen in accordance with, in alignment with the overall plan. And then let's get our ducks in a row, do the traffic studies, figure out what the road can be, get the wetlands approvals, get everything done, disrupt it once, and do it correctly.
Other questions? All right, thank you very much. This will come back to us on February 22nd, provided the committee is met. Done with it. All right, the next update, so Russ, don't go anywhere. The next update is the facility master plan. So Donald, I don't know if you want to, all right, Russ, the floor is yours.
So this is going to be quick. As soon as they change the PowerPoint, we have we're not going to go through the slides in detail, but where we are with the master plan right now is we have completed some capacity analysis work and enrollment work, and we're about to come up with ideas on how to improve each school. So I want to jump right into it. As you know, there's many different stages to the master plan. So we are right between the capacity analysis and proposed modifications to facilities. So you see that we're getting near the end, and we're really looking forward to working with the schools to look at priorities for each individual facilities. So enrollment, your enrollment is trending upwards. It's not dramatic, but it's about 3.7% overall. The elementary schools are, as a group, projected to be down about 22 students. That's really a meaningless number in the margin of error of demographic projections. So the master plan will plan to keep your elementary schools at about the same size that they are. The middle schools, that's a somewhat significant increase. So you are seeing some secondary growth at the middle schools. The one that's really significant is the high school. So that's 257 more students over an enrollment today of around 2694. So that's almost a clean 10% increase in your high school. That's measurable, and that has an impact. So the high school needs to be planned to accommodate that.
Russ, do you want to take questions while you're doing this, or do you want to wait until after?
However the board prefers.
So Peter, if you want to ask the question.
I'm sorry, Russ, can you provide some context to that? Over what period of time, and are you suggesting it's an enrollment increase we hadn't planned, or what is that?
Well, there's this chart up there that you can't read from here. So, but what we're looking at, the state of Connecticut wants you to plan facilities for the highest enrollment that you've had that's projected in an 8-year period. So what we looked at is the lowest enrollment in your last 5 years, the highest in your last 5 years, your 2017 enrollment, the projected enrollment that's for 5 years for elementaries, 8 for middle schools, and 10 for high schools. Then we looked at the highest projection in 8 years to come up with a planning target. And the numbers we're talking about are the planning targets. So for the high school, for example, it's the 2951 is the highest projection in the next 8 years.
Let me, I'm sorry, Russ, just to make this fast. Is this, I presume these numbers are exactly what was in the enrollment projection that we already approved, right? So this isn't new news, right?
This is not new news.
And this data is that data?
This data is that data.
Okay, fine.
We just have to use it because it's sure. We get to the next thing we're going to. So the next issue is how do your schools accommodate your enrollment? And this is an important process. So we look at it in 2 ways. We look at it in what if your buildings continue to be used exactly the way they are used now? Do they appropriately hold the enrollment based on your current class sizes? The second way we look at it is, well, that really punishes schools who have squeezed in, because that just says that you're going to continue whatever overcrowding they've managed to accommodate in the future. So we looked at it a second way, which is really has been a big task. We created a model program for each building type, elementaries, 2 sections, 3 sections, 4 sections, all 3 middle schools and the high schools. And we worked with the administrators to say, is this space something you really must have? Is it a core requirement, or is it a goal requirement? And it was separated into instructional core, activities, all categorized. We worked with our educational consultant on this. We benchmarked it against Connecticut standards and national standards for classrooms and spaces. This has been a lot of work. The core spaces are And since we've gained some experience here in Greenwich, we originally were going to do one model program, and then we realized we might want to do a 2-level, which has the core spaces and then the goal spaces. So we looked at we started with classroom size, and you have a great variety of classroom sizes in your district. And what we did is we looked at the Connecticut state standards, which are pretty fresh from late 2016, and we looked at this classroom sizes that you are providing at the brand new plans at New Lebanon, what you provided at Glenville, and what you provided at Hamilton, to arrive at a reasonable classroom size for Greenwich, which, by the way, is smaller than what the Connecticut state standard is, but it's reasonable, and it matches some of the other new buildings that you've built, and it's also, we benchmark it to New York state standards, Massachusetts, California, and Florida, so other large states with high-performing schools. And some of those room sizes are 1,000 square feet for pre-K and K, and about 850 square feet for grades 2 and up.
So Russ, if I could just ask you, if our average size presently at our newer buildings is less than the Connecticut state standard, why wouldn't we want to be looking at why we're not using the Connecticut state standard?
Well, I think the New Lebanon building was designed before that standard was published, so it's brand new. I don't know that a school has been built to that standard because it sort of appeared on the state Connecticut website with very little fanfare, but I will tell you that the Connecticut state standard is larger than what you have been building and larger than New York State, Massachusetts, California, or Florida. So it's kind of, in the national benchmarking, a bit generous. So I think that we've worked with the administrators to come to a reasonable one that, you know, it seems to be working for you at Ham Ave and Glenville, and it seemed reasonable to the building committee at New Lebanon.
So basically what we're using is more in line with the national standard than Connecticut's proposed standard.
Well, Connecticut's might be aspirational, but you know, there's a lot of things that are happening in classrooms now that collaboration space, group space, that are pushing the square feet per student up. We're just trying to get you out of the 1940s to a reasonable standard, and I think that this does that.
Russ, what's the impact on reimbursement if you build less than the standard?
I can't honestly say that I know. Most of the reimbursement in the grant program is based on maximum cost allowances, so I think it doesn't come to necessarily EdSpec approval. It's can you keep it in within that maximum cost allowance, which I think the bigger you build, the more trouble you have doing that.
Ms. Olson.
In terms of the class sizes and the standard, just to clarify, I think this might also have to do with the fact that there's now co-taught classes are on the rise, so you have to legally have a certain size classroom to have multiple classes going in once. That's something that's happening a lot with a lot of the special education classes. You have co-taught, and that makes a classroom. That takes a classroom and you use one that's about almost a size and a half than what you would imagine a regular classroom. So that might be part of where this came from, I'm assuming.
Well, it's also that the Connecticut state number of students in the class may be a lot larger than what Greenwich wants, which is why their rooms are bigger. So there's a lot to this, and I can say that it's been multiple hour sessions with administrators to get to a detailed core program. And this is it. So it lists every space, what size it should be, how many there should be for 2-section, 3-section, and 4-section elementary schools, for each of the middle schools, and for the high schools. We actually have cataloged every space in every building in Excel spreadsheets, and we've conducted a comparison of every building to the model program, and that's been reviewed by every building principal now, and we're in the process of sorting that data to come up with an actual shortfall of core space in each building. So it's a very detailed, a lot of backup to that work. So what does it mean? The first way we did capacity, I didn't mean it. So the first way we did capacity was on how the spaces are used today. And you actually have some of your buildings are overused. I'm trying to be quick here, but it's hard to do months of calculations in summary, but so the way they're used today, there's this graph coming up shortly. So the blue here, the blue columns are your current enrollment. The red is what your enrollment will be. And the green is the capacity of the building as it is used today, not in accordance with the model program. So basically, you'll see the green below the red fairly often. And that means that there's a number of schools where you're sort of squeezed in. Those are all the elementary schools. So that's one way to look at capacity. Of course, Glenville and Hamilton Ave look really good. The New Lebanon chart in there is based on the existing building, not the planned new building. But you can see big changes are needed at Riverside, even Old Greenwich. Julian Curtis has a shortage. North Miamis. These are buildings that are not have generous amounts of space. You can see at the middle schools, there's not a lot of current capacity problems. So this basically is the table that talks to that data. When we look at the model program, and this is still under development, but just for the elementary core programs, so that's the must-have spaces. When we identify the amount of square footage that's missing for every building in your elementary division and total it, you're missing about 95,000 square feet of core space. That's about 2 elementary schools worth. Goal space, if you get aspirational and want all the goal space, it's about another elementary school's worth. So I think that you should expect, as we go through this process, that you're going to see that a bunch of your elementary schools need adjustments to be on parity with some of your new buildings and to really provide your core program for your elementary instruction. And again, this is going to be updated. It's been reviewed in detail with each of the principals. We gave them homework sheets. They went back and did the analysis. They verified our inventory. They verified our use. The core programs of the middle schools don't look like there's a big deficit. The core programs at the high school do show a significant deficit. There is some overcrowding at the high school. It is a very big building, but the instructional space is a little bit short in that building. And that can be accomplished in a number of ways through adding space, but also renovation and repurposing space. So that's going to be probably the most complicated part of the master plan, but and those are the next steps.
Jennifer.
So as a professional with a lot of expertise and experience in this industry, can you help us as board members understand when you add an addition onto a school, if you know your enrollment will increase for a number of years and then it will begin its natural decline? In other words, what is a rule of thumb for building out and for how many years of use?
Well, that gets to the life of a meaningful enrollment projection.
So let's say 8 years is the one we've used.
Right, 8 years is a good number because enrollment projections are based on birth data. So the birth data that's available this past summer means that you're going to have a kindergartner in 5 years. So for kindergartens, a 5-year projection is good. So when you get to 5 to 8, those are pretty good numbers. For high school, 10 to 15 years out is a pretty good number because it takes about 10 to 15 years for them to become high schoolers. But what's interesting in the core space is it's not your core capacity carrying spaces that are generally missing. It's your special subjects and your common areas that have been taken over to become core spaces. So when we look at a building, and I can give you a couple examples, like a Julian Curtis and a Riverside. The cafeteria is clean less than half the size that it needs to be. The whole idea of providing a science facility in an elementary school is completely missing in many schools. So it's not all about, is there enrollment? Do you need space? It's, are you really providing your full program? And that full program is being provided at your newer buildings. And we were told early on when we were asked to do this plan, this is about a careful thinking about parity for new buildings and older buildings. And that's what we're trying to deliver for you. So it's not just let every building suffer until you tear it down and replace it. It's, can we thoughtfully bring, charming old buildings like Old Greenwich and Riverside and Julian Curtis back to life for the next generation.
Ms. Raven.
So I guess there'll be 3 parts to my question. So because the core spaces are smaller and we're at a deficit just for core spaces, the equivalent of 2 elementary schools, does it start to get wiser to build a whole new additional elementary school versus starting to add on to schools and have to do major renovation within the school just to get to those, common spaces like the cafeteria and the other common areas? And then if the high school is at such a deficit and have to reconfigure, so sort of along the lines of Mrs. Cole's comment, when do we start to think about not adding on but building new?
Very good question. I think that the answer on the elementary schools is that if you build a new elementary school, you still have 11 substandard buildings that kids go to every day. So I think that the answer really is mostly use that program as a guide, do the best you can, expand and renovate some of these older buildings. Maybe 1 or 2 of them should be replaced, and that's to be seen. We're going to look at a number of options, just like we did with Cardinal Stadium, going forward on different ways to deal with this issue, and there may be some replacements. But I do believe that you have a number of buildings that are really important structures in your neighborhoods that are charming, that should be, that can be really exciting with modest additions and good renovations. And they can be fantastic next generation schools. And I would say, we've done 7 new school buildings in my career, but we've probably done 40 additions and alterations projects. They work. For the high school, that's a really interesting question, because when you look at around 270 students, you're talking about 10% of its capacity. Well, a grade is 25% of its capacity. Is it worth exploring creating a freshman academy? Maybe that's an interesting thought to be looked at, to take some capacity away from the high school. So the idea of a master plan is not to necessarily get an answer to everything, but to look at some alternatives that give you some options. So we're going to take this opportunity to do that over the next 6 weeks or so.
Mr. Sher.
Russ, or Jill, one of you or together, when you come back and deliver the final report, this is going to need a lot more color. I'm sure, Russ, you're kind of going, hey, blinders on. I ran my process as an architect. Here's what my process is. Here's the answer it spits out. This is such a radical departure from anything that the board has been told, at least, over the last 6 to 8 years. To say we're short 3 elementary schools of 45 to 50,000 square feet each, that's how big that is, in terms of total capacity, so you can visualize it in your mind. To talk about these schools that, now all of a sudden we just see as a matter, Eastern is not under capacity, so there's not a real issue with middle schools. Totally contrary message to everything we've been told by prior administrations. I'm not debating the answer, but this needs to be explained in more specificity and detail, and I'm sure it will be. But there's things here that, as an example, okay, there were some of us on the board, but we were spending $45 million expanding the high school. There were some who said, wait a minute, now this has gotten so expensive and we're so capped in, maybe we should go look at another high school. Of course, that was soundly shouted down by people who've been advocating for 10 plus years for a project at the high school, but that die is cast. So this presents a real opportunity, but I think, again, that was a scenario where we were told, oh no, everybody can fit into the high school, it's fine, so we didn't talk about that. Now we're saying, uh-oh, we're short 256, space for 256 kids. So, and some of that can be absorbed in current capacity, which is what I just heard you say, but there are other issues. So I'm not debating what the answer is, but when you come back with the final report, there has to be a bridge to some of these things, because I think as a board we're going to lose a lot of credibility given that it is such a substantially different picture that's been painted than what we've been telling the public for years. I hope you guys will take that into account. Jill, you've really got to work on that. I realize you can kind of go, hey, I'm new. I don't know what they told you before. I have no idea. Here's my answer. But I don't think that's going to help us build the level of support that's going to be needed for the level of investment in order to make a program like this work.
I think this was one of the reasons that our direction to Russ, once Lori and Dan Watson and I met with him and convened with the board and heard some of our initial thoughts. This is why the benchmarking has been so detailed. This is why, all that's been reviewed, and this is why we didn't rush it through for this year's BET capital improvement process. It's because this work, once it comes through, is going to take the Board of Education probably 6 to 9 months to be working through with the BET and with the RTM and with all of the different stakeholders to build that community collective understanding for what this is saying, for what this information is telling us. A master facility plan is just that. It's giving us the vision. It's not necessarily a roadmap. We're going to have to build that roadmap together, but we're going to have a good idea of what the standards are for a classroom size. We have a good understanding of what our enrollments are, but we have been saying, since I've been here anyway, we've heard, you have space, you don't need a new school, and we knew that was not true because we have about 2 classrooms that are not being used at this very moment. So we are providing educational programming in our classrooms and schools. We do have we have a comprehensive program of education here. You have world language, you have art, you have PE, you have music. You don't have that across the nation in every single school. So you do have a pretty comprehensive program. You need space for that. Our schools were designed before comprehensive program of inclusion. So you didn't have programs like ELF or special ed where you might need a small group breakout space. we are having to reinvent and reimagine schools for the next 50 years. It's likely that we're going to see some things that need to be adjusted, but I agree with you, Peter, we're going to have to all be working on this collectively, and it's not just a deliverable, like here's the plan, go to it. It is something you really sort out and prioritize and get concurrence on before you move.
Before you go, Peter, I'm going to have to talk. Given the amount of detail that's going to go into the next session, I think what we may do is devote a separate meeting, a work session to this so that we don't clog our agenda, that we can really be thoughtful about it. And I think it's going to take a lot more than one meeting to get there. So this is a starting point. I think this data will help that conversation.
Yeah, this was an update, and I totally endorse that approach. There's so much specificity to this because we know it's not maybe welcome, or it's at least new news. That it needs to be credible, you need to understand it, and this is really step 0 in probably a 50-step process to getting to funding things to do things.
Russ, and Joe, my only...
Can I see if anybody else wants to talk first?
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to finish off my original question, my original point.
Hang on 1 second, because we're not going to do 10 follow-up. Is there anybody else who has a question before Peter goes? Go ahead.
Joe, my point would be, I think you want to differentiate between, what I just heard tonight is different. Total space, total envelope of building, we're short 3. That's jarring. That's different than of the total space we have, it's not configured properly. And those are two different stories, right? I think everybody gets the part of the buildings that were built isn't the way we educate kids today. That's about the configuration. When you say we're short, I don't know what you said, 100,000 square feet?
About 95.
We're short 100,000 square feet. That's the thing that is really jarring.
Well, that's what the analysis...
But it's great. I'm glad you did it.
Yeah, I mean, and it doesn't mean that you go put 95,000 square feet on your buildings, because each one's a custom building.
Sure.
So now we're going through and we're looking at the specific shortage, and I can tell you we've looked... I've looked at Julian Curtis, Riverside, and Old Greenwich. I started with those 3 elementaries, looked at specific core shortages and said, what's achievable here? Because solving every shortage isn't achievable. You're not going to go add 80 square feet to 16 classrooms. You're going to live with it. And that 1,000 just goes away. Can't deal with that. But the cafeteria, you can deal with that. Can you add a science room? Can you move the kindergarten closer to the playground and reorganize and renovate some of these buildings? So then we're going to come back with these implementation strategies saying, here's something that's achievable, it costs X, you might want to consider that going forward. And especially with those 3 buildings that are not handicapped accessible, when you bundle in making them accessible with solving some of those problems, you get some economies of scale, and you can solve 2 problems at the same time.
Other questions? All right, thank you, Russ. We look forward to continuing to work on this. Exactly. Next up is our first read of the new policy, multiple pathways. Ms. O'Neill.
Multiple pathways is a new policy that really goes hand in hand with the graduation requirements policy. It provides students an opportunity to demonstrate their achievement of the standards through various options that they develop with their teachers and counselors, so that they would be learning the same standards, just demonstrating their achievement of them in a different way, whether it's based on a personal interest or on a career aspiration or whatever. But I think it's really kind of it's very forward-looking. I think it's exciting to provide students with other ways of learning. That is what we're trying to do with our whole personalized learning plan, with our strategic plan. So this policy fits in with our graduation policy and our vision for the district, providing opportunities for students to demonstrate their learning in various ways that they feel very comfortable with, and yet in no way will we be reducing our requirements in terms of the level of achievement.
So I was on policy governance when this came through. this is, the base of this is a CAPE policy. It's a companion to our existing graduation policy. I think it's a great way forward. We have students that learn in many, many different ways. We've seen this in practice. We've just been having a hard time fitting it into an existing structure that didn't really take this into account. So I think it's great that this is getting documented. Ms. Staten.
I want to congratulate the committee on this initiative. I think it's a fantastic way forward, not just for graduation, but for every single year in the continuum to have multiple pathways. And what makes it credible is the reporting. So I'd like to question Dr. Gilday on the reporting aspect, which really does make this something valuable for every student. Is there a task force underway to revise report cards that will capture all of the wonderful benefits of multiple pathways?
Yes, we're working with higher ed as well because we have to ensure that the transcript travel to the students as well.
Mr. Sheriff.
Barbara, can you explain, there's this reference in like 4 places to graduation requirements, but it's, can you clarify, let's deal with the one that is on page 2 at the bottom of the paragraph. Can you explain how this is worked? So it says a student's personal learning plan will detail how teaching will enable him or her to achieve expected. Does the plan set their graduation requirements in a personalized plan, or?
No, they have to meet all the graduation requirements, and so that they will have to, well, the option here is how they will demonstrate what they know. Maybe rather than writing an essay, they do a particular project, they go out in the community and investigate something that has to do with it. So I think it's just the way they're going to demonstrate, but all the standards
Well, then that means the graduation requirements, because right now the graduation requirements is you have to demonstrate proficiency, and it's very clear how you demonstrate proficiency. What you just said is I guess a teacher can determine how they,
right,
whether or not they're proficient or not.
This would have to be a regular formal plan, and as it says here, working with their advisors, their teachers, and maybe a mentor. And that would all be drawn up ahead of time. So this is the way Johnny is going to demonstrate standard X. And so that then would be formal.
So hang on, Dr. Francis. We're going to have order, Peter. This is how we run our meetings. So, Dr. Francis.
Actually, I was going to just respond to that, which is, I think it also has to do with credit requirements. So I think it's not necessarily just sort of the proficiency exam. I think the proficiency exam, if that's what's in our graduation requirements, I think that still has to be met. But if it's how do you get your English credit, if there's some way that you're going to go, and I'm making this up, but you're going to go work with a professor at Harvard to study something, and if it's felt that that's going to be equivalent to what you would have done in a classroom here or meet the same standards, then that's something that can be decided ahead of time. That there's other ways that you can meet the credit requirements or meet the standards that are needed.
So, go ahead, Peter. We're going to have order, Peter, so we raise our hands when we want to be acknowledged. Go ahead.
Back to you, Mrs. O'Neill. So I'm just trying to clarify what it is the committee is recommending in terms of establishing that proficiency. So I think I just heard Dr. Francis say in terms of meeting credit requirements for courses, under this plan, individual advisors can determine how that's met. But in terms of the other half of graduation requirements, which is establishing, demonstrating proficiency, they still have to take this, they still have to take whatever assessments are established in the graduation policy, whatever those may be, and that's the way we determine if they've met that proficiency. Yes?
Ms. O'Neill?
I'm sorry, I got distracted. So you're saying, so where they said, so 70% on such and such a test is whatever. So now we're saying that this student, under the advisement with teacher and advisement and so on, can do X to demonstrate at that level of knowledge in place of that. And we'll see it when that committee that's working on this comes out with this and they formalize it. And this is not going to be for every subject, for every kid. You know, this is probably for some kids who opt to do this, but they're not going to opt to do it in all their subjects.
Yeah, I wasn't worried about that part. I'm worried about us setting the policy and then the administration can go do whatever they want to do. Because
Well,
they have to
no,
execute
they'll
it.
come back to they'll come back with us to with regulations.
Okay.
No, because I had the same, when we were doing this, I had the same concern as you, that we must maintain our standards. And so I think through the committee, and it coming back to the board, I think we'll have that assurance.
And this will come back for a read at the next meeting. Dr. Gilday? Any other questions? All right. Again, this will come back up at the next meeting. All right, with that, we move on to the superintendent's transition plan update. I believe, Dr. Gilday, that's you.
Okay, and I'm not going to be talking about building or athletic fields. I know it's really surprising. I'll give you a new topic to think about, so we'll stretch your brain in a different way for a few minutes. So I've been working on my superintendent transition plan since I arrived, and I actually had an October update and I paused because we had a really busy agenda, and now I'm actually sorry I paused because now it's a lot of information to share where before it would have been a little information. So we have some new board members. I'm not going to rehash the whole document. I'm going to probably make the assumption you haven't necessarily read the transition plan, so there is some of the information here that provides the background. So we have the introduction to the plan, describes the mission of the district, but also I've added just my core values so that you, and many superintendents have the same core values, so they're not that unique, but the idea that we're really focused on teaching and learning as a district, it has to be the center of our work, that every student deserves the opportunity to achieve at his or her potential, which is where your mastery-based proficiency comes in, which is why that's a really good forward focused policy decision. All of us are responsible for the success of our students. That's our community members, that's our board, it's our cabinet, it's every administrator, every teacher, every parent. We're all in this together as a community. Collaboration with families and our community partners is essential for us to move forward. And then help and support, which I call a system of student supports, must be in place at every level so that each child continues to progress. That's for your most advanced learner, it's for your most struggling learner, and it's for every child in between. So I thought having some of that articulated might help frame some of the transition and the things I'm looking towards. Page 2 you've all seen before if you've read the transition plans. We're going to skip over that. If you head to page 3, I basically have done a crosswalk of the strategic plan components to the transition plan. Because in the transition plan, I'm highlighting areas of leadership and management, and it includes board governance, which is the work you've been doing on policy committee, and that additional training you want to take on with Lighthouse. It does add a focus for operations, facility, and finance, because that is not found in the current strategic plan, but obviously commands a good deal of time and attention, especially being new. You have to learn all of these things about the system. The transition plan does separate out our family and community engagement into its own area of focus, while the SEL components are addressed as part of the student achievement area. And it does group curriculum, instruction, professional learning, data and information management also under student achievement, because our focus is on the high student attainment with evidence-based practice. So all that's bundled into the plan together. If you look at page 4, I thought that would probably be the most helpful. It's the purpose of the entry plan in alignment with our strategic focus. So why are we really doing this plan besides forming learning and reflecting and focusing? It's really to gather the data that will serve as a foundation for root cause analysis, goal setting, strategy development, and district planning. And it's allowing me to check for understanding and test new ideas, which we're doing as a cabinet team every day. Our anticipated outcomes, so this is kind of the beginning of that June goal statement. I'm really looking at 2 things. Proven personalization of learning model. So that's what I'm hoping for. That's a big stretch, but that's the part where we're taking the math pilot that's going well in our classrooms and we wish to expand. It's looking, but of course we'll have the data for that to support that. It's the learner profile development, which we hope to launch in the fall of 2018. That's something the board will be working on as part of the January 28th retreat. Our system of student supports focused on high expectation, rigor, clear pathways for student assistance, and all of that being clearly understood by our leadership and staff. My deliverables are focused on academic achievement and evidence-based practice, as we've been talking about, and then improved community confidence with a high-quality operational plan that achieves compliance with all state mandates and delivery of education service changes is my second major goal area. So those are the two things that are kind of coming out of this transition plan work as really being those things I need to focus on in these next 6 months. I do have a framing question for us to focus on, and that's, how do we build this? How do we build on the strengths of this incredible district to set the course for an incredible future? To create a thriving, innovative, and high-achieving school system that prepares every student for success after high school, eliminates gaps in opportunity that contribute to gaps in achievement, and supports the social, emotional, creative, and intellectual development of all children. So I thought if we use that as a kind of a guiding force in our work together, that may help set us on a course towards where we are aiming. I have had the great opportunity to visit our schools weekly, and I really enjoy classroom visits. It's probably the highlight of the role here in Greenwich. But I put together here just a visual so you can see how this entry plan is working. I did a lot of listening and learning those first couple of months. I've identified opportunities, and then I check for understanding. I'm looking at root cause analysis. That's the part I'm at right now of this process, looking at the vision, goals, and strategy we need to undertake, and again, checking for understanding as we work to create action plans for implementation, and again, check for understanding. I thought you might find interesting, though, just a little gathering of what I'm calling the landscape of initiatives. So I wanted you to look at what things have been going on in the district. Again, this is like the stickies times a lot, right? So we have these things happening continuously. This is the continuous cycle of what's happening here in Greenwich, and it includes new projects that we've taken on and those things that are ongoing and take a lot of time. But if you look, it's a lot. It's a lot. I've identified strengths throughout the system, and I think they're definitely worth celebrating. I've bulleted those out, as well as some challenges, tensions, and opportunities, and I've bulleted those out. So those become focus of the work as well these next few months, as well as identifying the fact that we do need a good strategy. Unless we're happy with how everything is right now, we do need a strategic focus, a strategic energy to get everything working smoothly. Pages 9 through 13, I would say, 9 through 13 goes through those 5 areas of the transition plan. I'm listing for you in here the qualitative and quantitative metrics I'm looking at to be able to assess, how am I doing according to this plan? What are the things I'm kind of clicking off the list? And it really gives you an idea of those things I've been getting, compliance-based, but spending some time on. It is a lot of meetings. Feels like a lot of meetings, and then when you look at the numbers, it is a lot of meetings. I'm trying to align all of our work to the vision of the graduate. So all of those you can take a look at kind of at your leisure, and we can talk about them another time. And then the culmination of this plan will be, again, like an end of the year report with kind of those summary reports and additional information. So I have the expected outcomes of that, and then page 15 really launches into just what I'm hoping will happen then. So once we've gotten through this year, what are those things that we need to support transformation to a recognized, innovative, mastery-based progression district whose vision is centered on student academic, interpersonal, and personal success. It's a lot. But hopefully capturing what the board's aim has been. That's always the goal. Trying to bring the community and the board's vision to life. That's what superintendents like to do.
Thank you. Ms. Dean.
I want to thank you and congratulate you for a wonderful transition. It probably didn't feel as smooth for you as it felt for the board, but you have worked incredibly hard. I have never seen anyone in your position work so hard, and I truly appreciate all the hours behind the scenes that no one ever watches. When you're working and thinking ahead, what are we going to do the next 6 to 9 months? It's fabulous. If the board can take on work without infringing on your autonomy, I'd like to help you. Perhaps in a retreat we can identify areas where the board can take on more work. As long as it doesn't delve into management, I would be very open to that.
I'd also like to just say this, second what Jennifer has said, and also I think Dr. Gilday once told us exactly how many thousands of emails she's received, and she works tirelessly. And I just, also your organizational efforts are absolutely top notch, and I appreciate the way you spell it out for us, especially as a newbie on the board. It's precise and easy to understand, so I appreciate that.
Anybody else? All right, thank you, Dr. Gilday. Just keep working, please.
All right, with that, we're going to move on to action items. First up is the Greenwich Prevention Council Town Survey. We apologize it's taken us this long to get to you. Thank you for being patient. With that, Ms. Ford, if you'll kick it off.
I'm just going to do a brief introduction as the ladies make their way up. I've had the pleasure of serving on the Prevention Council, and I can tell you it's one of the few committees where it's very focused. It is also one of the few committees I've been on where all the right people are at the table, from the Chief of Police to the Director of Human Services to the private schools, the public schools. All the right people are there. And the other nice thing about this committee is it is truly prevention focused. We don't spend a lot of time celebrating problems. We really spend a lot of time looking for solutions. And one of the solutions, or some of the solutions, are going to require some funding. Nothing new. And the two ladies who chair the committee have been working tirelessly to get the town in position to apply for some funding from the federal government. And I'll let them explain the process and what the survey is, but I'd like to introduce Deb Katz and Ingrid Gillespie, who I'm very proud to serve with on the Greenwich Prevention Council.
I'm going to give you a little background. My name is Debbie Katz, and I'm actually the Director of Outreach and Community Initiatives at Kids in Crisis, and I serve as the Administrator of the Greenwich Prevention Council. The Greenwich Prevention Council is one of 150 local prevention councils throughout Connecticut. And the role of these local prevention councils is that they are focused on alcohol, tobacco, marijuana, and other drug abuse and mental health related prevention initiatives, primarily focusing on youth. The council in Greenwich is co-chaired by Chief Police Jim Heavey and Human Services Commissioner Alan Mary. The council in Greenwich has 32 members on it. So as Mary said, it is truly a collaborative effort. These 32 members fit in over 12 representative categories that are required by the council. And these 12 categories have to be represented. They have to fit into law enforcement, they have to fit into school, they have to fit into healthcare, business, government, religious, media, youth servicing agency, mental health agency, substance use, so that those 32 members really are a cross-section across Greenwich. Kids in Crisis provides the administration for the Greenwich Prevention Council, but the Greenwich Prevention Council really is a cross-section of Greenwich. One of the goals of the Greenwich Prevention Council is to take the necessary steps to be able to submit an application for a drug-free community grant. And what the drug-free community grant would do is, if received, it would bring $125,000 a year for at least 5 years, and then we could reapply again, so it could be for up to 10 years at $125,000 a year. And what that grant would do It would allow Greenwich to have a collaborative and coordinated effort to address prevention and reduce substance use among the youth in Greenwich. So to be able to bring that much money into Greenwich solely for the purpose of addressing prevention to reduce substance use, whether it's alcohol or marijuana or other substance uses, and we don't know what it would be until we assess what are the risks that are the priority in Greenwich. To apply for this grant, though, two things have to happen in order to apply for this grant. You have to meet two criteria. One of the criteria are you have to have an existing coalition. And we already have that. That's the Greenwich Prevention Council. The second criteria is that you have to have collected youth data. And part of that youth data is that you have to have successfully done a youth survey. And that's what we're here for today, to talk about. The findings of the youth survey can help the community be responsive to the needs of youth by increasing developmental assets and decreasing risky behaviors. Now, we've had a school committee meeting of the Greenwich Prevention Council. And this school committee has been meeting since last July of 2017 to take steps to accomplish the implementation of this Greenwich Youth Survey. I want to just let you know who has been sitting on this this Greenwich School Committee. Mary Ford has been sitting on it, Molly King, the head of Greenwich Academy, Patricia Kopis, Greenwich Catholic School Principal, Charlie Sachs, Stanwich School Head of School, Tucker Hastings, the Brunswick School Director, Thomas Phillip, Brunswick School Headmaster, Michelle Summers, Whitby School Dean of Business Affairs, Adam Rohde, Greenwich Country Schools Headmaster, Pamela Juan Hayes, Sacred Heart, Greenwich Head of School. So that has been making up this school committee. This school committee has been encouraged by the success of the work in the town of Darien. Darien is about to conduct the youth survey for the 4th time with all of their students in grades 7 through 12. That's what the youth survey, that's the age range that you conduct the survey. Darien is also on the 3rd year of a 5-year, $500,000 grant they received to address substance use prevention in their community for youth. The survey we will be discussing tonight for Greenwich youth includes strength, asset, and risk-based questions, and are the same surveys being used in Darien. The private schools have already approved and are ready to implement this youth survey. I'm now going to turn it over to Ingrid Gillespie from Communities for Action to begin to discuss what you have in your packets are the 2 versions of the survey that we're looking to implement. Some of the things that we're going to go over tonight in your survey, there's been some updates. Where there are updates of what you have, we're going to be discussing that too.
Hi, good evening. As Deb said, my name is Ingrid Gillespie and I'm with the regional coalition called Communities for Action. And we're one of 13 in the state, and together we provide support to the 152 local prevention councils and outreach to the 169 towns. So in my catchment areas, Greenwich, Darien, Stamford, and New Canaan, and I've been doing this job since 2004. Kim knows me since 2005, I think. So we're thrilled for the opportunity to talk about the surveys. I'm going to take a lot of your time. This has been a very interesting meeting, by the way. Learned a lot tonight. No, in a good way, in a good way. Anyway, so as Deb said, you've seen 2 surveys. She's talked a lot about with this grant that we want to apply for. I wrote the grant for Darien, so there really are those 2 criteria for this. This is a drug-free community grant, it's a federal grant. And they have standard measurements that they say, look, we want to know the 4 core measures, and they want to know around alcohol, marijuana, tobacco, and prescription drugs. And they want to know what is the perception of risk, what's the 30-day use, what's the student's parental perception, and what's their peer perception. These are evidence-based measures, and they say that if you can make a change in those in a community, you will see a reduction in risky behavior. But to our event, that from the get-go, since I started this job, and I think to Dr. Gilday's point that she really inferred, it's not just about reducing risky behavior, it's about building these developmental assets, which are identified by the Search Institute as 40 building blocks that will really help young people thrive. The more that they have, the more thriving behavior you're going to see, the more that they have, the less risky behavior, and I can send you the documents on that. So we have 2 surveys that will capture both. The one is the Developmental Asset Profile Survey. It's 58 questions that really measure and look at the categories about, around boundaries and expectations, how they feel about school, family, community, youth. And the other survey is what we call the Addendum Survey, and that measures some of the riskier behaviors. What are your perceptions around alcohol, tobacco, marijuana, other use? And in terms of Greenwich School Committee, also wanted to add in questions around cyberbullying, and we've had some gambling questions. So between those 2 surveys, we will capture both the assets and the risky behavior. Now, what Deb talked about with the update was that in order to correlate risky behavior, the 4 core measures with the assets, that the Search Institute has said that they can add those 4 core measures to the DAP, what we call the DAP survey. So that's something that can be done, and we recommend. In addition, those, we measure in the addendum plus additional questions so that we can correlate the 4 core measures to risky behaviors. There's not one survey that's going to capture both, but it's so important to capture both. Darian's been doing this survey. This is their 4th time. They're, I think, probably going to be doing theirs next week, so we've tried to time it pretty close. And other communities such as Westport, Richfield's done a Search Institute survey. So there's communities throughout the state that have done variations of this. I brought with me tonight Archie Swindell, who actually is the person that collects the data for the addendum and does the correlative reports around that. But what we're going to collect will really help us develop a baseline. I think we talked about baseline in one of the discussions tonight. You need a baseline to know if what you're doing is effective. And so for the first time, we'll be able to have that in Greenwich. It's a survey of the community youth, for which we're very grateful that the schools hopefully will give us access to the students. That's the best way for us to get a random sample. So, but a lot of schools have used this survey data to help them with their planning. In some of the transitional planning that Dr. Gilday talked about, we could see where some of this data would really help with that, because it's very strength-based. But kids in the schools have used it, and they've used student-led data, because sometimes you get, how everybody does drugs. Well, in some of the higher grades they do, but in some of the lower grades, like grade 9 and that, they don't. But when you have the data, some students are going, okay, look, 85% of kids in grade 9 are not using, and they've created social norms around that, which has really helped, because there's nothing like feeling like you're the only one. But the data can help us quantify where we need to focus. Darian's school saw reading for pleasure was low, so they created a day where, opportunities where the students and teachers just brought in their books to read for pleasure. And it was that in itself, they were like, oh wow, this is, and recognizing the importance of that. They've created a lot of social norm campaigns in that community that are making an impact. And we want to do the same in Greenwich. And I feel strongly that if we get this data, that we'll write a really, really good grant application. 120 awards are being awarded throughout the country, but we feel strongly that we have a good shot at this based on everything that we know about Greenwich. And we have, thanks to Debbie and Mary, we have a wonderful coalition. So there's a 3-minute thing or something. I must have passed it. I'm sorry.
Okay. I just know that there were some questions asked. The survey will be done in all of the private schools and the Greenwich Public Schools. We still haven't really decided on the number yet. The last time we had met, all the private schools agreed to do all of their kids grades 7 through 12. And we have to determine how many we want to do, because we want to make sure that the survey is representative of the town, clearly we've got most of the kids, so we don't want it to be all Greenwich Public Schools. It will be a town result. You will not get school-by-school results, and it will be totally anonymous. And we spent a long time in the committee working on that, and we felt that the anonymity by school was more important than having schools get their own information, so that we're not comparing school to school, we're looking at the kids in Greenwich as all kids in Greenwich. So it's totally anonymous, the results will not come out by school, it will be a town result. And we are still debating how we're going to work the numbers so that it is representative clearly of all the kids in Greenwich and not only the public or not predominantly public school kids. The cost, oh, go ahead.
You know, addressing what Mary just said, we've done the numbers. If Greenwich private schools do 100% of their kids and Greenwich public schools do 50% of their 7 through 12, the numbers come out almost equal. So that way the total number of students surveyed will be approximately half and half from public and private schools.
Yeah. So just a question for you. What is the cost of administering the survey? Who's responsible for that?
Okay, so the cost of administering the survey for the, you know, for both surveys, the total amount comes to 6, I have it right here, 10, 11, it's about $11,000 for the total. It obviously would need to be split in half, so that, I mean, that, you know, what we would hope is that the private schools would cover half, and we'd like to, you know, hope that you might be able to consider.
I think we're looking at about $5,000 to $7,000
Yes.
for the GPS portion.
And it's not a budgeted item as I understand it, so is this something we'd absorb in the PPS budget, or where would this come from?
I'm sure everybody would look to my budget, but I would work with Jill and Lori and see if we could figure out where's the most appropriate place to get the money from.
Dr. Francis.
I'm a little torn about the ability to disaggregate the data. I feel pretty strongly that we don't want to be in a situation where we're pointing fingers at given schools or other places, but if you're not going to then have the same intervention at all the schools, which might be hard to coordinate, it'll be much harder then to look at the impact of those interventions. So if one school does one intervention and does a reading day, but another school decides they're going to do something else, how do you determine if that worked if you don't have any way of disaggregating that data? Is there any way to do that secretly, or to keep that data for the future, so at least if you do an intervention, then maybe you could decide later that you wanted to go back and unveil that information in some way?
Well, no secrets in Greenwich.
Yeah, exactly.
We actually had that exact conversation, and we just sent it just to schools in a little, you know, unidentified envelope, and no one would know. But anything that we produce as a result of this, since it's involved in the federal government and it's data gathering, we'd have to make available publicly. So if we disaggregate the data, everybody will see it.
The private schools said the same thing.
Right.
You know, they sort of, you know, they wanted to keep it, you know, anonymous so that no one would say, you know, the private schools, and then at the same time, they thought it could be helpful to know, and went around and around.
Ms. Terry.
So excuse my naivete. So how do you choose the children randomly and also keep it anonymous? So you're going to do it electronic, you're picking by their student ID, like how do you imagine to parents and to PTAC, this is the most important issue, to keep it private and make sure we don't know who said what.
Here, we've got an expert on that.
Hi, I'm Dr. Archie Swindell. I have been doing these surveys around the state for since 2004. I have always, in schools, in districts with multiple schools, and there are several like that, I always ask what school the student is in. The districts don't always want to know that, for the very reason that you're mentioning. They don't want to pit one school against another, but if they do want to know it, the data will be there. I can tell you that I've done something like over 100,000 surveys. And I counted up the number of districts, 15, I think, districts, some of which I've done 6 or 8 surveys over the years, some of which have only done 1. I can, you know, in all those years, I've never had a single incident of revealing who took which survey. So the anonymous nature of it is absolute as far as, in fact, if you post an icon on the website, on the school website to access the survey, there's actually no way I would ever be able to identify the student. So my recommendation was, I understand the concern where you don't want to, you know, pit schools against one another, but if there is, I mean, there is a real downside to that, as you have just pointed out. You can't personalize or tailor interventions to schools if you don't know which students are in which schools. So if you want, it would be very easy to add a question. What school are you in? And give them a list. So I'll leave that up to you.
Yeah, I think.
Students would have the option of opting out like they do on every survey.
Right, but how are you choosing the 50% of the students?
Yeah, that's when, the way you choose, I mean, is that, you know, you'll have to decide whether you're going to do this in your social study, you know, what classroom or what, right?
So schools pick, you pick a class that everybody takes, like English or homeroom. And within the school, so that when a school, like Darien is surveying 100% of their school students, so that's a non-issue. But in schools where it's a random sampling size, 50%, you're gonna go in and literally say, okay, what class does everybody take? So typically English, whatever. And then you will literally randomly pick those English classes so that the number equates to the number of students you want to survey. So that's how random sampling is, that's done in an efficient way. Yeah, so the school would go in, so you would go into the school and we'd say, what class? So typically English or whatever class they would have, or whatever, and you'd say, okay, so you can, you know, have 1 through 6 or whatever, and have numbers 1 through 6 in a hat. It equates to a class, but that's on the list, and you literally pull out, okay, we need 3 to equate to this number of students, and that's how simple it would be. Now there's 2 URLs, so we're going to have a site coordinator for each school. We're waiting for this meeting, the private school pretty much know. We'd have a site coordinator that Debbie and I would go out and work with and say, okay, this is the script, all that kind of stuff, all the preparation stuff. I'm watching the chairman go. So all that preparation is done there. The opt-out too, we didn't get into, there's an opt-out letter, there's a sample of that we're sending out to people, that gets sent out to the parents, and in it says they have the chance to opt out and where they can access to review the survey ahead of time.
Ms. Reagan?
So I know I mentioned this survey, I'm trying to think when it was, if it was late summer or early fall, so I 100% hope that we endorse this. I think at the very least getting a baseline is just so critical, and I feel so strongly about it, I would fund it out of my own pocket.
Did somebody write that down?
Yeah, it's on tape.
You got the recording? All right, great.
And both surveys together, just so you know, 2 of them, take anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes total time.
Ms. Wilson?
I also think this is useful and important. I would just want to make sure, I'm imagining we're going to get back some feedback that can be alarming. And I just want to make sure that we have a plan in place. So it's not just a survey that's out there, but there's actually some, people keep mentioning the word interventions, but something that we have a system, a program set up where we can then go in and do something about the results.
So what we're using in this whole process is something called the Strategic Prevention Framework. It's a 5-step process. The first step is assessment, collecting the data. The second step is building the capacity, which, building the people in that we need to be able to do the work. The third step is planning, and that's where we look at the assessment data and we look at, in terms of prioritizing, and we look at the root causes, like what is causing these things, and that could be more focus groups, etc. Then we develop, we take those and go, okay, what's feasible? What is the community ready to deal with? And what do we have the resources to deal with? And we look at evidence-based strategies, of which you can go on National Registry of Evidence-Based Programs, but there's a lot of evidence-based strategies, example peer-to-peer. And we develop, and we use the surveys as our baseline indicator. So in 2 to 3 years, when we go to do this again, we've implemented, we go, okay, are we seeing changes? And we focused in on, we identified the assets and risky behaviors. So there is a clear plan in the framework, and with the coalition, there definitely is. So yes, because you don't want to collect data and it sits there. I mean, there's a very clear purpose to this.
The other thing is, because we're not just doing a risk-based survey and we're doing a development of assets, that in addition to whatever things that we're going to see that may be concerning, we're going to be able to release also some unbelievable strength-based stats too. So there will be a real balance, and we expect that to come from the youth in this community. So that will also be coming out, and so it won't just be about risks and concerns.
Ms. Dayton.
Who in Greenwich, Connecticut is going to fund the remedies after your analysis? And second of all, when and if we need to renew our funding from the feds, when do they require a repeat administration of the survey?
Okay. The one thing where you asked who's going to, obviously, that's one where we're going to, based on what comes out of the youth survey, is going to help us figure out where we have to target the money for. So that's why we need the youth survey, because it's going to point us to where is the risk, and that's where we're going to apply that money toward and hopefully get that grant. Plus, many other people in the community, whether it's agencies and United Way in schools, are going to be able to use these results to apply for additional funds. Because once you have this youth survey data, it will open up many other opportunities to apply for funding in general. So it's hopefully going to bring additional money into this community for these things. Now, how often do you have to keep applying for this money? Every survey. Yeah, the survey.
You have to. You're asked to measure the 4 core measures of all the survey every 2 years. I heard that you have. Or no more funding. You have to do measuring every 2 years. If you can't, you have to have a clear explanation as to why it might be improved. You have to. I've seen some communities stretch it to 3, but in order to maintain a good standing with this funding, which can be up to 10 years,
but we wouldn't have to do the full survey, just the brief question.
Any other questions? This is an action item, so in order to move it forward, we would need a motion. I guess, Mary, because it's an action item, the expectation is we'd vote on this tonight, although this is our first read. We would have taken this up at our work session normally, but thanks to Mother Nature, that was not possible. So, Dr. Francis. All right, and just to be clear, the recommendation for the proposal is the voluntary participation of the randomly selected students in grades 7 through 12 in the townwide survey using the developmental assets instrument. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor? 8-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and Ms. Rayburn, you can make the check out to Mary.
Get a receipt.
Are you the Board of SC? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you, ladies, for staying so late.
Thank you.
All right, the next item is tuition and fees. Ms. O'Donnell with Dr. Gilday. This was an item that was postponed from a previous meeting. We had asked the administration to go and come up with a proposal to allow students for credit recovery to attend at the reduced rate. So, Ms. O'Donnell,
Sorry.
can you come up to the mic? I'm sorry. Aaron and Leo let me.
The schedule that you have presents the secondary summer programs, the course fees, we're responding at this point with a footnote included to clarify that that students who are recommended to attend for credit recovery or students who need additional support will be considered eligible for the free and reduced lunch rate.
Dr. Francis?
I'm a little confused about the thing above it, which says notes. So we have a whole list that says basically for free and reduced lunch, it's $32. And then it says notes, tuition subsidies for free and reduced lunch. Students apply only to credit recovery courses or courses for academic advancement.
And I don't know if you want to clarify.
Students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, regardless of what course they're going to take, if they've been recommended or not, get the reduced rate.
Well, then it has to be revised.
Any student who receives who qualifies for free and reduced lunch is eligible to take any course that they want, or even if they've been recommended for, at the reduced rate. So that way it's an even playing field for students who have already been qualified for that.
I guess there's just a little confusion because I hear what you're saying, but that doesn't represent what the language on the page
There's been a clerical misunderstanding when this was written up. Both Lori and I recognized that tonight. There was a lack of clear communication from whoever asked someone to do this. So we will get that straightened out for you, so it will be clear.
So there are a couple ways we could deal with this. We can either take it up at the work session after you clarify the language. Is there a need for this to be done before then? I guess is my question.
No.
So I think the cleanest way to do this would be to take it up at the work session. Mr. Scherer.
Maybe an even cleaner way is, why don't you tell us what it's going to say? And then why don't we approve what it's going to say?
I would be happy to tell you that, but I left it back in the office, and at 9:38 or 9:42, I probably would not remember it verbatim, so
I see.
I'm sorry.
Okay. On another, well, if you're going to clean up that language, it would be, I think I'm the one who brought this up, it would be helpful maybe if the last caveat, and maybe the second part of that, student who needed additional support, to meet anticipated growth. For me, that still seems a little vague. If we could render that more explicit.
I'll have that conversation with Mr. Dunn.
Yeah, that's what we talked about last time, so I think we got a definition for Mr. Dunn in something we did in summer school.
I'll have to make sure he gives that to me.
Put that language in here, and then I guess, well, I guess later we can talk to Jill about implementation. we're going to get the summer school report so I can ask the question.
All right, if there's nothing, Ms. O'Neill?
Right, I think we need a summer school report, because in that we talk about growth, and I'm not sure how we're going to determine whether someone is growing enough or not to indicate whether or not they should go to summer school. That's a big change, so either we need some really clear language on that. Okay? And
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this in the summer school committee like 3 or 4 times, and I think we agreed. The board has to hear it, but I think we agreed that instead of that you guys were coming up with a definition of what that is to determine who's eligible, and I think what happens now, if I'm correct, and maybe we'll find out, is whatever that standard is going to be the standard K through 12. Okay.
None against. All right, so we'll take this up at our work session. Thank you. Moving on, the next is the financial and staffing report. You need your note.
Okay, the financial report for month ending December 26th was submitted for your review and approval.
Questions? So I'll say it because I'm a broken record. Hi, Mary. You knew it's coming. You know, I see again the area of concern, special ed, and now we're over budget by slightly under $1 million. So one, I want to understand what the cause of that is, and two, I want to understand where that money, where we're going to make up that shortfall, because as we start, we're already in our budget process for next year. Now I'm concerned, did we ask for enough? Are we covering what we need to cover? So.
As I tell you every year, this one is really a wild card budget line. Currently, that number, $1,166,000 approximately, is for settlements. Those are more, that represents approximately 29 settlements that range from very small amounts like summer school tuition to a different camp, to some pretty hefty amounts that were ordered or that we arrived at after a due process hearing and that carry over year to year. So there are about 29 settlements, there are 29 settlements that account for that money. Tuition is $3,842,000. That represents 36 students who are outplaced by the district. Approximately four of those students came to us with outplacement IEPs. And when you ask how we don't anticipate numbers, I have no way of anticipating that. So you have kids who move into the district with an IEP from another district that has that student attending a school that costs approximately $100,000. We weren't expecting that. These are the kids who are the most significantly challenged by their disability, and the tuitions are what they are. They are getting more and more expensive. I think if you ask any district in Fairfield County, they will be saying the same thing to you. We're seeing more kids requiring out-of-district placements. The last 2 years, we've seen an increase in students who have never been in district, who have been in private schools, whose parents then come to us when the student can no longer attend the private school and ask us to support them in either residential or therapeutic settings because they can no longer be managed. We have to go through the identification process. If they qualify under special education, then these are kids who are in crisis, and we end up absorbing the cost. I don't know those children are out there, so I can't anticipate having them in the budget. So that's somewhat of the wild card nature of this budget line. Just the other two things that are carried in there, the one that's the most significant is Effective School Solutions. And that's the program that we purchased in the high school that we're hoping, and so far has either kept kids from going out to more restrictive settings or been a good halfway point for kids when they come back into district after being residentially placed, to give them a place to get absorbed back into the high school with some very significant support networks. So that number of those two programs, and Ableist is in there as well, comes to about $307,000. So that's where that number is. We will absorb as much of it as we can within this PPS budget. If we can't, then we will go to whatever accruals we have through the district, which we've done in the past. We did increase tuition for next year. We took a cut in it this year because I was feeling confident. I know you don't feel confident. But with Laura Raven's check, I'm sure that we will be able. You just never know. I know the kids that I know, and we anticipate that budget. I don't know those kids who move in or those kids who crash and burn, and we need to move to more restrictive settings.
Mr. Scher.
Jill, I just heard what Mary said. I'm sure that's true. There's always variances in budgets. That doesn't sufficiently explain $1 million variance.
What's really interesting today, I just received today of all days, Fairfield County superintendents had this very same question, and then they were responding, to this. And Easton had a budget increase that's up $680,000. Reading is up $750,000 to the point that their ER9 line is 13.5% of their budget. Weston, very similar story. This is Ridgefield. The impact is prevalence rates are up to 11.3%, 10 unplanned settlements, 7 students moving into districts with private placement IEPs, which is $492,000. Medically fragile students at over $200,000. So they're looking at a huge deficit there. So I'm literally
what I'd like to
conversation.
get, that's fine. I mean, it is what it is. What I'd like to get, though, is removing all of the personally identifiable information on the students. It would be helpful if you could take that $1 million and break it down line item by line item. What's in that $1 million? So as an example, I just heard of 4 students with tuitions. I think you just referenced that I wrote it down. 4 students, $100,000 tuitions. That's $400,000. I think we need to know, okay, I have no interest in who those kids are. I'd like to know the actual dollar amount that was written for tuition and to which school or therapeutic setting, because I think we need a breakdown of that. If you had come in here and said the variance on this thing from 3 million is 20%, which would be a huge variance, okay, that would make sense. We're talking about a variance here that's, it's 33% of the budget. So I think, and it doesn't look like, if I heard the description, we're now at month 6. Okay, and this thing only seems to be getting worse. So to be candid, I think we need, Jill, I'd like to see some more color or detail behind this, and if we need to discuss it in executive session, I'm going to hear from Mary some concern about confidentiality, that's fine, then we can talk about it in executive session. But this is a big number, and it means something else major has to be cut to fulfill it. I think we need more information, not these anecdotal. I'd like to see more information rather than just these anecdotal references.
And you read my mind. There is some confidentiality here because in some cases it's one student at the school. So if I told you the name of the school, you could track back to who the student is. But I'd be more than happy to if you wanted to pull in an executive session. I can describe the placements and without giving names, tell you about the costs. But I do want to protect
I
the
have no interest in who the student is. I mean, I do have interest in who they are, but I don't want to know who they are.
Right, we can certainly do that.
Dr. Francis.
I'm trying to get a sense of how we spend our time, and is this something that we imagine we can have a significant impact on, or is this something where we might be able to project more effectively? And if we can't make too much of a difference, I don't know if I want to spend an executive session on it. So I'm just curious to get a sense back of what impact we might be able to have with it, and a sense from other board members as to whether that's how we want to spend the time.
Anybody want to make a comment? I don't know that I need the level of detail for each student, but I think having a written bucket list, and I need the names of the schools, maybe just a brief description, might be helpful in the next report so that we do understand where that breakdown is. Because, you know, we're asking this on the fly, I know you have the numbers, but to give a little bit more color to where that number is coming from. And the other bit, and I know I've asked you this before, is what can we do? I know you say some of it's unanticipated. What can we do to mitigate? Do we have enough money in the budget next year? Are we offering similar programs in district that are being rejected by parents for any particular reason? You know, the settlements always concern me because it means we're in an adversarial process with parents. And I know the nature of it by state statute is adversarial, but what can we learn from those that will help us, guide us the next year so that we don't find ourselves in the same situation?
And again, remember that the bulk of this is for tuition of kids that we place out of district. And we place them out of district generally because their behavior is such that we can't maintain them safely in the district. And we try to get them back. That's certainly, at every meeting we have, we talk about what would it take to reintegrate the student back into the district. But I can tell you that some of these kids have some significant behaviors that make it very difficult for us to bring them back into public school.
So sorry, Mary, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but knowing this now, I assume this continues into next year's budget. So is our budget next year sufficient for this?
I don't know at this point. Some of the students will graduate. We have 2 or 3 kids with some heavy-duty tuitions that are graduating, and we're not backfilling at this point those kids. Settlements, I can't tell you. I average that out over years. And again, I took a cut in this line from this budget to here because I thought we were doing pretty well. And then 3 kids move in and 4 kids, you know, kind of go off the rails, and then these private school kids that we never knew were out there come in and are requiring residential therapeutic placements. So I think we're okay, but I don't know.
Ms. Dayton.
Since we're going down this road, what's really interesting to me, interesting is the wrong word, what's most significant to me is not the residential placements, and it's also not the placements for severe behavioral problems that we cannot serve in the district. I'm interested in the dollars spent on placements where a parent has challenged that we are not providing an adequate education. That's what I can affect. And so if you wouldn't mind breaking that down, that would be great.
In the settlement line?
Settlement line, I want to know how much we're spending on attorneys and what are we spending on tuition.
Well, I can tell you most of the settlements, first of all, they're all confidential settlements, so that would have to be, but the settlements are generally lump sum settlements, so they settle for all claims against whatever this is. So when we go into mediation, we negotiate what that's going to be based on the whole package, which could be placement in a school, tutoring, private evaluations, they're not, attorney's fees, transportation.
I'll note, Mary, those aren't confidential to the board. If we needed to take it up in executive session, I suppose we could, depending on the level of detail that board members want. Mr. Chair.
Mary, I just was, maybe you can help me again. You just said something that I wasn't certain I understood. You've talked to us many, many times about obligations of the Board of Education to know and find all of the children that have special education service that are in private schools within the town of Greenwich. Is that true K through 12?
Yes.
Okay, so Then I got.
And pre-K through 12,
Okay, so
3
then I
days
got.
in the school.
Then I got a little confused when you said we get kids from private schools that we don't know about.
Correct. They may be going to a private school in Westport.
But they're a resident of Greenwich, which
Correct.
means we're required to know.
I would only know them if the parents make me aware of them. They may not have a disability, so theoretically, you could have a child who's going to a private school in Westport. They have an emotional breakdown. They require hospitalization and a therapeutic placement. I wouldn't know that you had placed your child in Westport.
Yeah, this is why I think I want to differentiate between, it seems to me, this is the part I'm not comfortable with, and this is why we need to see the data, is you've described a number of scenarios, right? And we have the kids we have. And those kids, we're providing various special ed services to them. Some of them we can't accommodate in the district or through settlement. They were moved into, we have lots of kids, as an example, who come to the district and say, I mean, I know of a bunch of them, they wind up at Eagle Hill, and we wind up paying the bill. So that goes to Ms. Dayton's question of, why is that happening, that we can't do it? Okay, so that's one question. Park that. Then there's a set of these kids, and we can see, we can project forward year to year because we're doing these IEP updates all the time because they're required through doing PPTs. So we can project forward to see at some level, we can forecast forward what's going to happen. Of course, you have some surprises, right? What's puzzling to me, this is why we think we need to break it down. If the entire $1 million overrun is absolutely things we could have, under no circumstances, ever had any visibility to, then it is what it is. I think the more important part is, though, to the degree that some of that is things that maybe we can modify either our policies or our practices so that we can get visibility to those and then we can properly forecast for budgeting, because this is a budget forecast problem is what this is. I'd like to understand that more, because if there's a better way to support the special education organization so that it can forecast better what the needs are going to be. Because once we set the budget, if we all show up with $1 million, we have to, that magic money doesn't just appear. It means something else has to get cut, and $1 million is a lot of money.
Well, theoretically, that's what the excess cost money from the state was supposed to cover.
I know we don't have that.
Correct.
Right, so now it's our problem.
But that was even the state recognizing that districts are going to be in the position where things come up that are in excess of 4.5 times the districts per pupil, that the state would say, we understand that that comes up. So there's an understanding, I think, in the state and in the local governments that this is a somewhat volatile piece. I will tell you, we don't like to send kids out of district. We really don't. I don't want to put a kid on a bus on the Merritt for an hour. So we do what we can do to keep kids in district as much as we can. But there are going to be times when we just make the decision that at that time, for that child, we need to move to an out-of-district placement. I do cast my projection, which is the number I come to you with in the 208 line. But, you know, I've been pretty good, but not great. You know, we covered it last year. We're not going to this year. I share your, I wish I could project better. I think we do the best we can, but we're like all districts. It's just a very volatile line.
All right, anybody else? Take a motion to.
If there's some, if you want to give me some collective ideas about how I can present the information that would be more informational to you while protecting the anonymity of the kids, I'd be more than happy to do that.
Thank you. All right, any other questions on the financial and staffing report? Can we get a motion to accept? Ms. O'Neill, second. Dr. Francis, all those in favor? 8-0, thank you. All right, next up, E020 transfer, Ms. O'Donnell.
Okay, so we're presenting 3 transfers this evening for your approval. I think two of them are prior year expenditure items, and one of them is an accounting item to put salaries in the right accounting line.
Can I just ask you about that? The first one, and I think it was maybe one of the other ones, I think it's the first and third were prior year expenditures. Is that right? So we're basically paying last year's bills?
We are. That's correct.
Okay. And I mean, this happens every year, so don't worry, it's not just you. Anybody have any questions for Ms. O'Donnell on the transfers? Get a motion to accept the transfers. Ms. O'Neill, Dr. Francis, well, you guys you're on it tonight. All right, all those in favor of accepting that transfer? Peter? 8-0, thank you. All right, that brings us to the last item, which is the agenda plan. Obviously, the tuition moves to the work session. We're going to need to find a date to schedule a separate work session or retreat with KG&D to discuss the feasibility, or we can try to clear an agenda of another meeting. We can see how that works. Maybe it's clearing one of the work sessions, and we can look at it and see where that falls. Is there anything else we want to try to add on to an agenda? Dr. Francis?
I meant to bring this up in PGC, but I know we had started to talk about Lighthouse and trying to fit that in. I don't know if that's in the works and if you have any glimpses of when that might be.
We've identified dates, so now I'm just in communication with Nick Caruso to see if he has those same dates available.
All right. If that's it, someone want to make a motion to adjourn? Ms. Olson, thank you. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.